In this instance, okay, so you don't think that if you want to measure it, some of the current metrics will be used for funding areas, and it's very funny. I'm just worried.
I don't think
That's if we're going
even
to
in
use
our descriptor
force to get an answer on why it's not strong. That's the tendency that we're trying to have. And then there's it's really between two and two and two existing communities, like the one cheap. It's just something.
No, I know. You're right. I don't want to ignore it, but we've got to. Oh, y'all should be worried.
What should we be worried about now?
Oh, we got lots.
We are on a path. How are you?
Okay.
Good to see you. Oh, are we ready? We're ready. I told Andrew I want to get
mics on.
Hey guys, this is we're evolving here, but if your mics are on, this is actually for everybody. Like if you're up there having a side conversation and the mic's on because of that, and you don't want, we've already had a couple of these. So just be super sensitive to the fact that a sidebar with your mic on, even talking to your friend, is no sidebar. The millions of people that watch EEE will be privy to it. So, okay. Okay, with that said, we're going to go to the three departmental bills that let's just do it in the order, the numerical order. We'll start with Senate Bill 236, and we've got the panel, the only folks who have signed up to testify. So Secretary Flora, whoever you want to lead off. Again, we're on Senate Bill 236, and then we'll just go to then 245 and then 266 after that, okay? So we'll start with Senate Bill 236.
It's modernization.
I'm just hoping that Senator Augustine and your sidebar conversation was nothing too problematic. Okay.
Very positive. More to discuss. Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, again, I am Rebecca Flora, Secretary, Maryland Department of Planning, and I'll let each of my colleagues introduce themselves for the record again also.
For the record, Chuck Boyd from the Maryland Department of Planning, Assistant Secretary for Planning Services.
And for the record, Andrew Wilson, Government Affairs Specialist from the Maryland Department of Planning. Pleasure to be with you all today.
Great. So we are here to present Senate Bill 236. I will shorten that by saying a modernization bill. We have 8 elements that are part of it, and I'm going to just give you the high-level summary. Basically, this bill is to improve coordination of planning and mapping functions performed by MDP and repeal obsolete, antiquated MDP requirements in the law. Like I mentioned, there are 8 components to them. I'm just going to basically touch on all 8, and then we can come back and ask any more detailed questions. So the first one is requiring correspondence from the State Administrator of Elections regarding precinct boundary updates. The second one is adjusting MDP responsibilities and ensuring consistency of water and sewage plans and solid waste management plans with local master plans. Third item is adjusting requirement to produce municipal population projections for all municipalities. The fourth one, removing reference to the now discontinued State Economic Growth, Resource Protection and Planning Commission, as well as reporting requirements to the commission. I'll mention, by the way, that that hasn't been done in 20 years, to give you an idea of what we're trying to clean up here. The fifth item is removing outdated statute allowing for the transfer of MDP budget to the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, which I will note has never happened. Removing item 6, removing reference to outdated capital facilities planning responsibilities, which are now housed with DBM. 7, remove responsibility to establish geographic classification standards that have been antiquated by modern GIS standards. And our 8th item is to adjust the requirement of MDP to be a repository and clearinghouse for information on all real property available for public use in the state to simply being a repository for information on state-owned property. I went through the list with the intention that some of these may be very straightforward and obvious, and I thought it would be best to save time to dig in on the ones that you all may have specific questions about, and we are here to address those. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, do we have some questions? We're going to start with Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Secretary. Good to see you and your team, and appreciate your effort when you come to Smith Island and other places in District 38. My question on the bill, and it goes to the piece about the election data. And I have a kind of a specific question. I just want to better understand. In my district, it's pretty easy as far as I have all of Worcester and all of Somerset, so you have the whole map. When it comes to Wycomico County, it's divided between 2 senators, and that was obviously recently updated in the last redistricting. And I've been kind of asking for the maps on, kind of what those lines to get actually kind of even deeper in detail. Mm-hmm. I guess I'm trying to better understand the information that you'll be getting from the local boards of election. It would then be used as far as basically updating those maps and making sure those lines are, I guess, a little bit more detailed oriented for your maps?
Well, we're looking for efficiency here. So we do get it. It's just that it's often dated by the time it makes its way to us. We're trying to create a direct line of data that's already being provided, but have it at the same time CC Maryland Department of Planning so we get it sooner and we can update the map sooner. But I'll turn to Chuck in terms of that process so that maybe that'll make it clearer of how the process works and how we're going to try to just make it more efficient through
and
this
then
one.
I'm just also trying to understand how you do those maps and, just so we're also not only receiving it in real time, but that you're getting the information and the detail that I think we would want.
It's based on the data we get, but
Right.
Chuck, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, currently, we are not notified at all about that. And so this bill will actually put us on the list to receive that information. When it's received to the local boards of election, they are to also pass it on to us. And we want the electronic form of this. So we are just going to take their electronic information and compile it together so we can get to the statewide map. So we won't be defining those boundaries or anything. We'll just get an electronic form of that we can then consolidate and prepare statewide district level maps.
So just the bottom line, you're currently not receiving the information
We occasionally receive it, but we are not
on a regular
required,
basis.
they're not required to give it to us.
We're not on the mailing list.
So we ask for it, sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. And so now it is if the Board of Elections has it, they're supposed to provide it to us.
And then based on that information, you
We
do
build
the
the maps.
detail of your maps.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, additional questions? We've got Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Secretary and team. The change from real property available for public use to state-owned, help me to better get a sense of that, and that it feels to me like there might be, who is going to be the repository for that which, let's say, is in easement, conservation easement and stuff like that, that's not owned by the state, but would be a part of the map? Like, help me understand what it is today and how this will be different.
Yeah, the short answer is that this is what we do now, which is manageable and it's state-owned property specifically. This is sort of in the code, but we don't actually have the resources to do it all. And so we're just trying to clean up what is actually happening in practice right now because of the reality of we just can't possibly do that all. But to your question about who maintains those other databases like preserved land, I'm going to turn to Chuck again in terms, because there's different entities that maintain different aspects at different times.
Thank you, Secretary. Yeah, first of all, the information that we currently collect is on state-owned properties, What we don't have the ability to do is get all the local information or the federal information. So we have, and we provide to the General Assembly that information. When people ask about it, we can only provide the state information. What we can't provide is that local information. Your second question about related to easements on private property, there are mapping efforts. In fact, that one repository or that one dashboard that the Secretary referenced is a compilation of DNR, MDA, and MALF, all of the other easements that we maintain with those other state agencies on tracking that. So that's private property and private maintenance of those particular areas.
And I'm sorry, and maybe I wasn't, where is that? Right now, you're saying it's on the dashboard?
Yeah, if you go to Maryland Department of Planning and you type in Land Preservation Dashboard, or if you type in Maryland Land Preservation Dashboard, you will get up to it. And we update it on a quarterly basis, all of the information from local governments, because local governments maintain their own list and mapping. So they provide us that information. We get the information from DNR, we get the information from MDA, and MET as well, all those easements, and then we map it, and then we tabulate it so that we can give you an answer. Are we meeting our 30 by 30 goal, which we just celebrated? We're working now towards the 40 by 40 goal, so that data is collected.
We'd be happy to, we'll send you that link. And
Yeah, no, that's helpful.
Yeah.
And but what you're saying though is that that's more encompassing of what this said, which was the public use thing, but you all don't own that, didn't have a way to do that, and so you're narrowing it in this to that which you are able and you are current practice, which is the state-owned, just from my understanding? That's what you're doing here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Senator Washington and Senator Hester.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you again for the report and this opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to go to the Environment Code where you're making some recommendations for change, and I just want to get some clarity on that section. So,
Which item of the 8 are you?
sorry.
Oh, the water and sewer, okay.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and turn to Chuck on that one related to the water and sewer one then.
So the issue is right now, the Maryland Department of the Environment sends us information on plan amendments to the their local water and sewer plans and their local solid waste plans. Solid waste plans are more engineering based. They're logistics. How do you collect things? Where do you put it? Where you deposit, et cetera. Department of Planning doesn't have that expertise, to be honest with you. And what we do have a lot of expertise is on the land and the land compatibility. Water and sewer is very much tied to land and how you can intensify development in those areas. So we want to continue to provide MDE review comments on the water and sewer plans, but we're proposing to remove us from that mandatory requirement for the solid waste because it's, quite frankly, we just don't have the expertise in that area, and we don't really add a lot of value when we do those reviews.
Could I follow? I think the intent is that we have different resources. So there's water, air, and land, and that the laws and the plans should be working together, and that I believe the planning department review, whether you have the resources or not, or the practice has changed to such that you're not doing what is lawfully required, is that it all works together. So it's impossible to review a water plan, in my humble opinion, my experience. How do you review a water plan or a sewer plan without understanding how the local is disposing of its waste?
Keep in mind, Senator, first of all, as we shared in the earlier presentation, we work with all of our sister agencies. So this isn't, it's always a collaborative effort in terms of the comprehensive plan reviews and other things that we do. But this is specific to solid waste. This would be your trash that goes out the door versus your sewage pipes, for instance. And so the solid waste, in terms of how that is actually managed, is a whole other type of waste management, so to speak. And that's kind of in the code right now, but it's never really made sense for that to be part of Maryland Department of Planning, because it's just simply how are you handling that trash that comes out of the household and into, and that is clearly an MDE responsibility. But it's not that we wouldn't still be coordinating with them all of this, it's just who's the primary on this.
I guess I have a clarifying question then. So these are local master plans, right? And so just let me understand what plan exactly you're talking about.
The law is confusing this,
Right.
because it's when it says master plan, it really is the water and sewer plan or the solid waste plan. And so the law references master plan, and it's really a functional plan. It's not your comprehensive plan, which is different. So it asks for us to review their master plans of their water and sewer and their solid waste.
Very confusing terminology.
So just what I guess I should look, but what section then is 9 is what's right before it? So what is 9.500 and so this is just about trash? This isn't operational?
Yeah, we can follow up with you on this, but again, this is dealing with solely the water and sewer plans and the solid waste master plans.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, Senator Hester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary and team. I was just curious, I mean, we've done a lot of work on solar siting in this committee, and when I was looking down at the bottom of page 5, lines 28 through 33, where you're removing the land like available for public use, and so I'm just thinking about the like the DG Plus tool, and like if you look at that tool and you're looking where could you possibly put solar, and then you're thinking like, okay, well, where on state land could you put solar, and then you're thinking, well, if a county has a goal of putting solar, like, so if you take out all our ability to track the county land, does that impact the DG Plus tool?
We don't do that now anyway, so we're really just looking at
But they're
state
pulling the
property. But in terms of that tool, I'm going to once again.
So-
The DG Plus tool pulls like the GIS files from a number of different agencies. So I'm just making sure.
It
No,
does
good
not
question.
affect that the Smart DG Plus tool, because we only report on state-owned properties. Now, there is a bigger repository of our parcel mapping information, which is all ownership of all land around there. But what we don't do is it's extremely difficult to figure out what's a public use, first of all, and then versus a county use, and then a lot of details about the different components of a county. It's bad enough with the state, because when we look at the state, sometimes it's DGS owns a property, sometimes it's DNR, sometimes it's a University of Maryland. So we have to figure out all of those, quote, state-owned properties, and that's extremely challenging to get that, let alone all of the details about each of the different 24 counties and their ownership. We've never done that. Smart DG Plus tool does not have that information from us at all.
Okay, that was helpful. But you also kind of confused me because you said that you only report on the state land, but there's this larger repository of all the land in the state. What is that larger repository?
The State Department of Assessments and Taxation has every property that's, and we assist with the mapping of that. So, but the ownership of that becomes really difficult to figure out who owns a particular property, and then to classify, is that public or not along the way. So if you want to click on a parcel, you could find out, according to the deed information, who owns that property. That's a challenging at times to figure out what those LLCs are along the way. But so you can get that information, but we don't report on or categorize or analyze that property, only the state properties.
Okay, thanks.
We'd be happy to, once again, follow up, because we have a whole property mapping team that works with state tax, and yeah, their job is very focused around that coordination, but I think the simple answer is this would not affect the tool.
Okay, Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Hester and I were actually looking at exactly the same section, but I have two questions. So on page 5, I'm looking a little more narrowly, lines 28 through 33. I'm coming at it from another angle, not just county governments, but municipal and federal, because I loved your chart from the briefing that you gave us before about the 8 considerations as we look at planning. And again, the Department of Planning is offering guidance or opinions or considerations, advice, however, whatever word we're using, to county and presumably municipal governments as well. And so resilience, transportation, economy, housing, equity, ecology, plan, land, and place seems like around NIST, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, that matters. Or the courthouses or the city hall in Rockville, or the, sort of what's locally owned or federally managed that we should kind of have in our databases and have as consideration when we, as in you, are offering guidance to local governments. So that's one question. Then I have one other totally different question.
I'm not sure I captured the question.
So the bill proposes, as Senator Hester flagged, to just talk about state-owned properties. So I'm talking about not just, so the senator talked about counties, local government, but also I'm asking about municipal and also federal, because they also seem to be important as we are thinking about our planning and infrastructure and improvements in all of the ways that you guys are doing such important work as the state is moving forward.
This particular amendment is to clarify the language of what is practicable and doable versus the language which has never been done and doable from that standpoint. So it's an amendment to the current, what's included, so to speak, in terms of our requirements. So I think if there's a broader interest in that bigger picture, that's almost like a separate undertaking than this particular amendment in this location is my best response to you. I don't know, Chuck, if you have anything to add to that question.
Again, from a practical perspective, we have not been able to have enough resources to be able to figure out, investigate all of those properties, to maintain those properties, because they're constantly changing, to be able to do an annual reporting at least, or be able to report on both for federal, county, municipal, all of the different aspects of public use. So we're focusing now, and we're proposing to change it, just focus on those that are state-owned properties.
So if I could follow up, and I'll try one more time here. So NIST, in the heart of Gaithersburg, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, coolest federal institution that no one's ever heard of, does great work. The fact that they are smack dab in the middle of Gaithersburg is important when it comes to housing and transportation and all that. And presuming, knock wood, that it's not going anywhere, that means that as the county, as the state is thinking about plans, it seems like knowing that NIST is smack dab in the middle of Gaithersburg is something that we might want to know. And if you're creating a repository sort of one time and just randomly keeping it updated and not expecting lots of changes, knocking wood again, to be made, it just seems like that could be a one and done for the most part when it comes to Pax River or NIST or NIH or any of those. So just putting it out there, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I'm curious if you want to reflect on that.
I think the big difference, and I think Chuck mentioned it earlier, is the ability to differentiate what property is available for public use. And so if there's a privately held or a federally held piece of property, our ability to differentiate whether or not that's available for public use or how it might change, or someone may do a pocket park somewhere, that's totally out of our ability to gather that type of data. Now, from a property mapping standpoint, we do work with the state, SDAT, In terms of property mapping, it's this point about, is that property available for public use when it might be a privately held piece of property or something other than state government held? That's the distinction and why it's just really not feasible in terms of how that was written originally.
Okay. Senator Hester, it looks like you want to do another follow-up on my follow-up to you, but can I just do the other question, if that's okay, Mr. Chair? You've got in here, and I don't have the page and line right in front of me right now, the update every 5 years. The census is only every 10 years. What would be your sources for updating population growth, and how accurate do we expect it to be if it's every 5 years?
The American Community Survey, which is a survey, does give us additional updated data that we do track through our State Data and Analysis Center. That's our primary source.
And how accurate does that tend to be once census data comes out?
You know, it's an interesting question because I think it varies.
Okay.
It is a survey. So based statistically, the survey and the number, of respondents and, there's a whole statistical aspect of that I think the accuracy varies by area. But it's what we have. And it's what we work with the U.S. Census in terms of those interim updates or additional information. That's what we all have available for us to use.
So I don't know anything about their survey, but as this committee surely knows, there are a lot of populations that are underrepresented, yes. And the census outreach is really important to reach lower income folks, people of color, people for whom English isn't their primary language, and there's a lot of effort put into that. And so I don't know whether we're sort of having a roller coaster of underrepresented and then big effort in the outreach in the census years and,
Yes, before I let Chuck chime in, let me just mention, we're already gearing up for 2030.
Yeah.
And we were, I think, top 10 in the country in terms of the last round. But in terms of that is why we're gearing up now already for 2030, is to start really looking back at how things transpired the last go around. How do we work with all of those entities on the ground to really help us get to all of those hard to reach populations to make sure everyone is counted? And we're actually continuing a process right now of really looking at what might have been missed, because that's dollars, ultimately, in terms of just sort of how we not only get representation, but ensuring that everyone is counted. So I wanted to just mention that, but Chuck, did you have anything you want to add?
Just for clarification, when it says a 5-year survey, it's a rolling 5 years. Okay. So every year a new American Community Survey is done. It then improves the quality of the information that you have of what is considered current. So it's a rolling average of those 5 years throughout the state of Maryland or throughout the country.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Senator Hester, why don't you have the last question on, because we do have 9 other bills I just want to get to. So, Senator Hester, you've got the final one on this piece of legislation, Senate Bill 236.
Thank you. And Madam Secretary, I'm a huge fan of your work in the Planning Department. I think my question is more, a policy question that, just because an agency isn't doing what's in the code does not mean it should be deleted. And I think if every single agency came in here and said, oh, we're not doing this, let's delete it, we would delete 25 to 30% of the code. And so my point is just a broader one, like for the committee. Like, I think, we want to be realistic about what's getting done and what's not getting done. But I fundamentally don't believe that just because an agency is not currently doing it, if some legislator put this in code 20, 50 years ago, it may be outdated or maybe it just got lost and is serving an important thing. So isn't that so?
First of all, I totally agree. I think there's 2 aspects that I want to just clarify in terms of this particular bill. The 8 elements in there were very carefully assessed as to whether or not these are useful. Have they been done in one case in 20 years? And if not, why and why not? So yeah, the notion of, well, it's just not happening. I just want to assure you that all 8 were carefully assessed, went through a vetting process to determine, multiple criteria for why we should clean up these various pieces, which why they were all grouped as part of the modernization, but with a very thorough process. I would say counter to that, the next bill you'll be hearing around, the visions, hopefully new to be principles, is the opposite of that, of saying, this isn't being done well, let's do it better. And so in all cases, I've asked my team to look across anything that we touch to ask those core questions. Is this useful or not? Is this antiquated? And things that are on the books, they're good, but they're not being done well or being addressed. And we've gone through that serious vetting process. Thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary. That concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 236. We're going to go next to Senate Bill 245. Madam Secretary, I'm going to yield to you on Senate Bill 245. Same panel.
Okay, this is the one on annexation. And basically, it's a pretty straightforward one. Get my papers here pulled together. Basically, the objective is fairly straightforward in adding Maryland Department of Planning to the list of agencies that receive a copy of the annexation resolution with the new boundaries from the Chief Executive or Administrative Officer of the municipality that has annexed property. We just want to be on the distribution list. It just ensures that the information comes to us directly, which we are the ones that have to end up ultimately using it, and as per the earlier conversation about property. Presently, the notification comes from DLS, and we have to kind of chase it down. Whereas if we were just simply copied from the beginning, it would be right there for us to have available to use and to be more responsive in terms of our updates through the GIS systems that we utilize. So it's pretty straightforward, really. Add us to the distribution, make everyone's life easier, and create data that can be more timely and up to date.
Okay, any questions of the Secretary or the team on Senate Bill 245? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 245, which brings us to the final bill from our Department of Planning. We've got Senate Bill 266, and Secretary Flora, why don't you leave off? This one, we do have a few additional signed up witnesses, but Secretary Flora, why don't you start, or Mr. Wilson or Mr. Boyd, okay?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Okay, it's our third one. You already got the sneak preview in the previous presentation. I believe you were all here for that, so I won't repeat much of that. But in essence, the bill replaces, updates. This is an instance of, in fact, something that we think is extremely important, so important that it should be done better. And so we are updating the 12 current planning visions in the state economic growth, resource protection, and planning policy with new set of sustainable growth policy and planning principles, which we refer to as just the sustainable growth planning principles. Bill updating, as I mentioned earlier, is about creating more relevance, more clarity across the system, alignment, and just simplifying. But at the same time, really making something that can be understood by others and actually be more usable. And it actually ties into this whole evolution that we are trying to bring Maryland forward on in terms of sort of how do we think about land use and growth policy, to be thinking about it from that sustainability lens of the whole three pillars of sustainability and what the priorities are in the state of Maryland. So I will stop there because you had the earlier presentation. I think you've got the deeper dive there, and we're here for questions.
Okay, we've got a question from Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at the fiscal note, and you spoke in your briefing earlier, Madam Secretary, about changing it from visions to planning principles. So I was kind of comparing the two in the fiscal note. One thing that looks like an omission, unless I'm missing it, is number 2 on the current law and revisions is public participation. Mm-hmm. And as you go from, I guess, 12 items in that visions category to 8 in the planning principles, just kind of concerned where that would be in the new format.
Yes, thank you for that question. It's a very important one. Public participation is fundamental to any planning process, and in terms of sort of where it is in the principles, it's very specific within the equity principle, in that it's ensuring that public participation occurs, and it occurs across all aspects of the population with a particular emphasis there. And so the previous one, just for everyone's reference, is in the visions, it states, citizens are active partners in the planning and implementation of community initiatives and are sensitive to their responsibilities in achieving goals. In the actual statement, and I'm trying to find my language here, the equity principle, as we've stated it, basically says that engage all sectors of the community in plan development to ensure diverse voices are heard and the needs of underserved populations are prioritized. So we feel we've really captured that in the equity and even gone a step further to ensure that we really place added emphasis on those populations that may be underserved. I know all too well, having done a lot of public meetings, it's one thing to hold a public meeting and people show up, but does that really mean that you've really engaged all of the community? So we're, if anything, trying to amplify that aspect.
Okay, and I know there were some concerns a year ago with the governor's housing bill. With so we had some local governments came in with some real concerns. So I appreciate you clarifying that some because I worry about the perception that sometimes the state is trying to kind of force their will in local government. So it's that public participation is just such a key part. I would almost like to see that honestly still be the title of that, and yet put equity down in the explanation, because I think we need to really shine a light on that public participation as being key. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Washington.
Thank you. And I want to follow up with what Senator Gallion says, that in that public participation is its own thing and set of practices and principles, and really looking at what does meaningful public participation, for example, look like in a permitting process. And then also equity as a principle relates to all of these things, right? So so I do think that they are, so perhaps we'd be open to, or not opposed to, an amendment that would make public participation its own thing, and equity, which is across the board. So.
Yes, thank you, Senator. You know, all of the principles are so intersectional. They all intersect. But I absolutely hear what you're saying. I feel that we've actually enhanced the aspect of public participation through how we've put forth the definition under equity. But happy to talk more about that one.
Okay, any additional questions on Senate Bill 266 for the Secretary or for the other panelists? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 266, which, good job. Thank you for coming in. And you can enjoy the rest of your day. I did see Secretary Day out in the hallway. I don't know if he and his team, could somebody just pop in? Yeah, we can take the Department of Housing Community Development departmental bills next, if the Secretary is ready to roll. Okay, there he is. Mr. Secretary, why don't you come up? We've got, by my count, 4 departmental bills from Department of Housing Community Development. I'm not sure if you were planning, yep, you are planning to testify. I don't know who you want to bring up from your team, but I've got yourself, Danielle Meister. Will you tell me who you want to bring up as part of? Well, actually, let me qualify before we do that. It just occurred to me that we actually did have from the prior bill. Are there Paul Ellington or Michael Hinson here? I apologize. They had signed up favorable, and Mr. Hinson. Secretary Day, could you just yield the panel, because we did have actually one other witness from the Maryland Department of Emergency Management who wanted to weigh in on this prior bill, favorable, and I just missed him. And Mr. Ellington, I don't believe is here, but Mr. Hinson, why don't you give us your testimony, and then we'll go back to the Secretary for the other bills, okay?
All right, excellent. Y'all hear me okay? All right. So thank you all for giving me a minute of your time to speak. I'm Mike Hinson, the Chief Resilience Officer for the state of Maryland with the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. We are supporting this bill for a couple key reasons. First, if we do not consider and plan for the systematic challenges of hazards and stressors that impact our local communities, we leave ourselves vulnerable to greater consequences. By identifying resilience as a planning principle, it ensures communities focus on resilience and adaptation measures in a systematic way. Local resilience planning is critical to effecting change. Second, we are currently in the process of creating a statewide resilience strategy. This bill would support the ways in which we are planning to engage locals on resilience from the state perspective. For these reasons and those outlined in my written testimony, I support this bill. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hinson, and my apologies for skipping. Well, before you go, any questions for the witness? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 266. Okay, Mr. Secretary, why don't you come back up? I don't know if you had any preference on sequence. Otherwise, I'll just go through the bill in chronological order. If you don't, is that okay, or do you have a preference on which bill you want to go with first? I've got 4 bills from you all, and you tell me. Do you have? You've got. It looks like you've got a couple of folks. Okay, how about? Are we starting with Senate Bill 234?
Yes, please.
Okay, that's where we're going to start. So the floor is yours. Senate Bill 234, and Mr. Secretary. And why don't you introduce who you have up there with you so everybody in the committee knows.
Excellent. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members. Good to be with you today. Secretary Jake Day, Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. To my right is Carmel Roque, Secretary of Aging for the Maryland Department of Aging. And to my left is Danielle Meister, Assistant Secretary of the Division of Homeless Solutions for the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. So I'm joined by them today because the Department of Aging has a critical role in providing direct assistance to older adults who are experiencing homelessness. And as you know, I think we talked about last year, we've also created the Division of Homeless Solutions within the agency to elevate the work that we're doing in support of ending and solving homelessness in the state of Maryland. So a critical step in that process is Senate Bill 234. The department proposes to establish the state's first homeless shelter certification process and minimum standards to ensure safe, equitable, and trauma-informed care. Every year, over 25,000 Marylanders will experience homelessness and sleep in a shelter or outside in the elements. Homeless shelters provide a critical lifeline to some of our most vulnerable neighbors and citizens once they've lost their home, their belongings, potentially their employment, and often their family and support networks. Especially during weeks like this right now, where we have snow and extreme freezing temperatures, being able to stay in a homeless shelter can mean the difference between life and death. Because of the life-saving role that shelters play in our communities, it's essential to lower barriers that might prevent or exclude an individual from receiving shelter. This includes implementing non-discriminatory admission practices, ensuring individuals with disabilities have equal access to reasonable accommodations, and facilities have all the required conditions to keep individuals healthy and meet their basic needs safely. Today, there are few federal laws and no state and local laws that govern the operation of homeless shelters. Instead, shelter policy and practice is driven by what sources of funding a shelter receives. This leads to a patchwork of requirements that vary from shelter to shelter, with minimal enforcement of requirements, ability to implement corrective action, or ensure due process when an individual experiences an injustice. Of the nearly 200 homeless shelters in Maryland, over 35% are solely locally or privately funded and operate with no rules or oversight. The concept of licensing or certifying facilities that provide care and services to vulnerable individuals is hardly new. Maryland already certifies and licenses and regulates nursing homes, assisted living facilities, foster care homes, child care centers, and I think it's worth pointing out, we have an incredible oversight process and licensing process for animal shelters, but not for human shelters. Through this bill, we're asking for similar rights and protections to be extended by persons experiencing homelessness. Shelters serve highly vulnerable populations with complex needs, such as people fleeing domestic violence, that's 8% of the occupants of homeless shelters. Children under 18, that's 20% of people occupying homeless shelters. Older adults, that's 26% of people occupying homeless shelters. And chronically homeless individuals with a disability, another 18%. This bill could not be more timely or important, especially considering the changes being proposed at the federal level to roll back regulations and executive branch protections for fair housing and for certain marginalized groups. The bill does include some notable amendments from the 2024 session when it was first heard, including the provision that shelters will have a minimum of 12 months after regulations are adopted to come into compliance and apply for certification. The bill also ensures that DHCD must extend deadlines for compliance when a shelter has good cause, and the shelter is demonstrating progress in coming into compliance. Additionally, through conversations with stakeholders early in this process, beginning at the end of December and early this month, the department will be happy to accept more amendments that are currently being drafted that will address the needs and concerns that county emergency managers and continuums of care have brought to our attention. So at this point, Chair, with your permission, I'd like to turn it over to Secretary Roach from the Department of Aging.
Absolutely. Madam Secretary.
Good afternoon, Chair Feldman. That's okay. Vice Chair Kagan and committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of SB 234, DHCD's homeless shelter certification legislation. I'm here to elevate this issue and how it impacts older adults who are steadily and increasingly experiencing homelessness in Maryland. For those experiencing homelessness in Maryland, older persons actually represent the fastest growing cohort. Over the past 5 years, most Maryland jurisdictions have seen triple-digit increases in homeless older citizens, mostly in rural areas. According to recent DHCD data, about a quarter of homeless shelter residents were older adults. And our older adult population is growing exponentially, especially in rural areas of our state. Between fiscal year 18 and fiscal 23, Maryland experienced a 77% increase in homelessness of people over the age of 65. We are talking about grandparents on the street with no place to stay. And in Eastern Shore counties and in Baltimore County, we've seen the most significant increases. Frequently, there is a precipitating event, a health crisis, which is what leads an older person to find themselves in need of a shelter. And so these individuals are already experiencing issues around their medical care needs and perhaps compromised in their physical status and mental status. So details around homeless shelter design, accessibility, and other building standards, staffing, and training can be critically important. This tiered certification approach, led capably by DHCD, will best account for those needs growing older. So going forward, not only older people, but all people who are experiencing homelessness will be able to access quality shelter care. A year ago, we had an executive order signed by our governor to create a longevity-ready Maryland initiative. The long-term goal is for us to shape Maryland into a state where more older people live lives that are healthy, financially secure, socially connected, and purposeful, with improved access to affordable housing, health care, and retirement needs. Part of making Maryland longevity ready for all is a high-functioning homeless shelter network that brings a uniform baseline to access and services for all. Aging-friendly for all ages and all stages of life. For these reasons, I respectfully urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 234.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Are you going to weigh in as well, or are you just here for questions?
Yes, but very briefly.
Okay.
So pursuant to last year's legislation, DHCD has been working on a report and recommendations regarding how a shelter certification process should look, what kinds of standards should be adopted, and what a shelter resident bill of rights might include. And we finished that phase 1 report that's currently in the process of being shared with our partners, and it's going to commence a 3-month feedback and intensive engagement period. We will be soliciting via focus groups, interviews, meetings with folks with lived experience of homelessness, feedback on the specific recommendations, as well as the report and certification process. over this next 3 months, that will include paid engagements with folks with lived experience to provide feedback on whether they feel this legislation and these report recommendations have gone far enough or if there's more work to do. The report does recommend creating a tiered classification system for shelter certification. So acknowledging that shelters look different, they operate differently all across the state. No one shelter is the same. And so the types of standards that we're proposing are going to be customized to the type of shelter. A year-round shelter that operates out of a facility should not necessarily be held to the same standards or same approaches as a shelter that operates out of a motel on an overflow basis. They're just inherently different. So our report recommends developing that tiered classification system with custom solutions around standards of care. And it also confirms our intent at DHCD to provide a lot of technical assistance and resources to come into compliance, as well as the long implementation window that Secretary Day described. Our goal is to screen shelters in, not screen shelters out, and to raise the standards of care for everyone who seeks those services.
Okay, thank you. Questions? We're going to start with Vice Chair Kagan, then Senator Watson.
Mr. Chair, thank you all. Madam Secretary Roque, good to have you here. Secretary Day, thank you for all that you do. Thanks to everyone at DHCD and everyone who works on this important issue. It is frigid out there now, and as hard as it is for some of us to walk, 2 blocks from the Senate office building to the State House, imagine spending overnight out here. So this is the Lord's work here. You believe in the Lord. I have a few questions here. So one is on page 7, the list of descriptors based on which one cannot be discriminated against. That was really clumsy grammar. We want to be inclusive and welcoming, and we want to provide housing for people who need it, who otherwise don't have a home. 2 things that I'm noticing that are missing is language spoken, native language spoken, and the other is citizenship. And so I'm wondering if that was an oversight or on purpose. I think they are. I think that's important, especially today. And the other question, you can answer this one first, then I have another question.
Yes, this is an easy one. So it was an oversight in the original bill, and we've already worked on submitting amendments to include both of those.
Both of those?
Yes.
Perfect. And related to, so I have a lot of people in my district in Gaithersburg and Rockville for whom English is not their native language. And so on the criteria for homeless shelters, I hope that there's a consideration not just of all the provisions for, starting with line 18 on page 5, pregnant individuals, nursing individuals, infants, and children. I think, again, if we can't communicate with people who are staying in the shelter, who need shelter, that doesn't mean that every shelter needs to have someone who speaks all languages. But I do think that whether that's a language line or some access so that people can be given direction, welcoming, maybe even just a welcome document or a place, just so that we are, again, being inclusive and caring for people. And then the last question that I have is that you had to, no, I have 2 more questions. One is, we treat nonprofit organizations that provide housing the same as municipal or county governments or state government, anyone else providing a faith institution, anyone else, they are all in the same bucket, the same process for inspection and certification and training and all that, yes? Okay, and the last thing, it talked about inspected every 2 years. And I just wondered, it occurs to me that in Ellicott City, in Annapolis, there are, in other parts of our state, we may have natural disasters, we may have problems where a homeless shelter could be adversely affected, and waiting another 20 months or something to go check it out and make sure it is safe and free of mold or free of disrepair. I just wondered whether that's something you might want to think about, just to make sure we are creating respectful and safe places for these folks.
Yes, an additional amendment that's also being submitted. We've gotten lots of great feedback that we're internalizing. Another amendment is a specific carve-out for shelters that are operating as part of a county's emergency operations plan. So that's usually going to be in response to a natural disaster, inclement weather. This doesn't live in the bill, but lives in our report of recommendation, so it would be in regulation. We also include a provision for what happens if a shelter has a flood or a fire and they
That's what
need
I'm
to
referencing.
temporarily relocate. We have provisions in there to do a conditional use that's not based on an inspection. The most important thing is life, health, safety, get those folks to a habitable environment, and then we'll follow up with you and we can put together a timeline that's collaborative.
The latter part is what I was talking about. So I understand the COOP, the continuous operation. I was talking about, again, perfect example of fire or a flood. Oh, I think it's fine now. We swept it up, we cleaned it up. Well, it turns out there's now mold or something. And so I wouldn't want to have a year or a year and a half wait until it's looked at again after some sort of devastating.
As someone who used to run shelters on a day-to-day basis in a prior job, the number of plumbing incidents you have, it happens, right? Life happens. The things that would happen in your home also happen in a shelter. So we do have to have like emergency use authorizations, the ability to move people quickly without having to go through a cumbersome process. And that's our goal. Our goal is not to prevent a relocation as needed.
It's still not exactly what I'm talking about. It's not the relocation, it's the when they come back. I just want to make sure the when they come back, that it is safe and secure and cleaned up, fixed up appropriately after an incident.
Yes.
Yeah, I think if I can just offer, I think a way to respond to that would be to add an exception to the 2-year cycle that in response to an emergency situation, we could require an additional inspection, like a reoccupancy inspection or something like that.
I think that would make sense to the degree, but you guys are the expert, but I think it's worth a conversation.
We can work on something like that.
Yeah, in our report of recommendations, I would think of the inspection timeframe for 2 years as a minimum, a floor. It's what's required to get certified. But in our report, we also add language around the need for sometimes non-routine or unscheduled inspections, based upon a complaint we've received, based upon a habitability issue that we're aware of. So our report does outline that, even though it's not in the bill language itself.
I think you hear the question that I'm asking, so I'll look forward to seeing your proposed amendments. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
we've got Senator Watson next, then we'll go Senator Carrozza, then Senator Hester. Senator Watson.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that last statement. So you guys are going to create the equivalency of a use and occupancy type certification for all these entities, right? And so you had mentioned we have approximately 200 in the state of Maryland, Secretary Day. And thank you for your comments. So they're all a little differently. Some are repurposed hotels, motels, something like that. So my question is, if there's an entity that has gone under non-compliance and they don't do the remedy in the proper amount of time, is it, I think read in the bill, in the fiscal note, there are going to be 3 program managers who are responsible for defining the criteria and the process for continuous oversight. So are they, kind of goes into site in the COOP planning, they will have to extricate themselves from the facility because the facility, let's put the thing in place where you've worked with them, they decided, you know what, forget it, we're out of this business. Where do those folks go? And is it up to the program managers to figure out some additional lodging because they can't go on the street?
Yeah, please.
So, we're obviously in pre-implementation, so some of this remains to be seen, how folks will react to a certification process. But in general, we look at compliance as a long window of corrective action.
Yeah.
And depending on the severity of the issue, of course. And so, if a shelter were to need to close down, that would come with plenty of warning, plenty of notice, a lot of collaborative problem solving, hopefully, with them and other partners like county governments or funders. Sometimes compliance issues are just a lack of funding.
Yeah.
Folks have good intent, want to come into compliance, but don't have the resources. So, that's where some of that demonstrating progress in compliance is really important. So if a shelter is doing the work to come into compliance, there's good cause for why they haven't quite gotten there. We're always going to try and work with them to do that first. But at the end of the day, if a shelter were to close, part of our responsibility would be helping find alternative shelter options for those individuals. We do that now.
Got it. So
we have shelters closed down now, and that's a role DHCD plays already.
thank you. So with respect to the variety of shelters in the 200 mix, are they state funded, local funded? Are they nonprofits, or are they private entities that are for profit?
All of the above. There's a mix. And so the role that the state plays generally is as a partial funder of those that we support through the continuums of care and through awards to local government. So we don't operate any shelters, but we participate in the support of the operation of shelters. And then yes, there's county and municipal funded shelters, at least in part, in some cases in whole. And then yes, there are nonprofit and privately held.
So there are no state totally funded homeless shelters in the state of Maryland.
No state operated. Whether or not any survives only on state funding, I'd have to defer to Danielle. I wouldn't think so.
No, I mean, not 100%. I would say every shelter in the state, relies on private donations, things like that. But about 30% of shelters in the state receive state funding now. And in rural areas, we do make up the majority of shelter funding. So typically, in a typical grant application, we see about 75 to 85% of the budget coming from DHCD funds.
So here's where I'm going, and I'm particularly interested in your statistic that older residents have been more and more going into the homeless aspect. And if the state is subsidizing the homeless shelters, does the state also work to subsidize the rent of folks who are currently in senior homes and senior housing?
That's a great question.
To keep them where they are instead of bringing them out and then paying for them to move somewhere else?
That's a great question. So Senator, I think you're touching on kind of the most frustrating aspect of the housing continuum is that it's always a process of trying to keep people housed and get people housed, right? And it is decidedly more cost effective to keep someone housed than it is to have to rehouse them. It's an incredibly expensive proposition to fund shelters and to fund rehousing of people, whether that's in an emergency situation or a long, slow process. Permanent supportive housing is incredibly expensive.
So this is the number one issue I have in my community, and I know it's not a state responsibility, but I have seniors who are in fixed income. The landlords continue to raise rent, along with inflation and those types of things, with the argument that we have to keep the lights on, we have to do maintenance and those kind of things, and they simply can't afford it, nor do they have anywhere to go, no family members to move into. So now, where does that put them? So they always contact me, do you have any state resources to help subsidize so I can stay here because we can't afford it? And it has always been challenging for us to try to fight a private held concern like a landowner to keep the prices low. And then we get into the whole, do we want to put a cap on this? And that starts a whole nother conversation that we don't like to get into. So I just wanted to see if you guys provide any support for that. Was that a part of the conversation on the whole, bigger picture homeless shelter piece?
So three of the major ways that we play a role in keeping seniors housed through DHCD and anything that your department does, Secretary, feel free to add. But three of the things that we do that are critical are, one, that we do fund the creation of age-restricted housing. A portion of our tax credit projects, which receive not only federal low-income housing tax credits, but also state capital through the Rental Housing Works program and through Partnership Rental Housing Program, those create age-restricted, so senior housing. In addition to that, we do have housing vouchers, both federal and state, that seniors can benefit from. And then the third thing that's really critical that I don't think we shine a light on enough is to acknowledge that oftentimes what gets a person into a situation where they're losing their housing as a senior isn't just income and expense, it's housing condition. So whether that be a roof, whether that be plumbing, whether that be accessibility issues, all of those things contribute, and even energy efficiency, all those things contribute to people getting into a situation where they lose their housing. So we have special loans programs as well as a variety of energy efficiency focused products, grants and loans that can help people stay housed.
My last question is, we did suffer a significant fire in Prince George's County some time ago. Many people were displaced. Many people had different forms of insurance who could provide them temporary housing, but many of them, were literally out on the street and contacting locals, can you help, can you help? And we didn't know where to tell them to go to. Is your office a place where you could find something temporarily while they look to get back on their feet?
Yeah, we don't provide the service directly, but we do have grants with every jurisdiction in the state for both homeless services as well as prevention. It may even be the same project I'm aware of, which is a townhome community that had a really devastating fire in Prince George's last year that we helped resolve and got them connected to services. So generally, our method of approach is once we become aware of a concern, we then work with the local partner who's receiving our funds to have a response.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Carrozza, you're next, and then we'll go Senator Hester, then Senator Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Secretary, Madam Secretary, and the team. Thank you for being here. I know we've worked through some issues to reach this point. I want to focus my questions on the smaller nonprofit, faith-based shelters. And I would point you to the details that the Maryland Catholic Conference put in their information sheet, since they are the state's second largest social service provider network. Specifically, and I know you mentioned this tiered structure that could possibly address that, but they are raising specific questions, I think, about having some more leeway in the process. They do mention, the limited funds, mention the possibility of recurring state funding once they reach certification. And they also mentioned a phased approach to the compliance, which maybe gets to the tiered structure. But I just would like a little bit more detail on specifically, as you well know, and I'm looking at the Secretary, our churches and faith-based organizations, we know this on the shore and statewide. I mean, they're often the lifeline and are providing those, I would say, essential life-saving services. So I just would like a little bit more detail on specifically what we're doing to make sure those smaller faith-based nonprofits, are able to get through the process.
Before I hand it over to Assistant Secretary Meister, I guess I just would add, Senator, or offer, the point about funding and recurring state funding is a critical one here. I think there is a good policy question to ask, and I know how I would answer it. I don't get the final say on this, but collectively we all need to contribute, I think, to this conversation. That many of our shelters, most of our shelters, don't receive state funding, and if this opens a door to getting state dollars into their hands, I think it's a win collectively to addressing unsheltered homelessness in this state. And I'd love to find ways to get there. I know there are differences of opinion and tough implementation challenges that we got to work through. But I can't emphasize enough that we recognize the critical role that shelters play, and we don't have a stake in many of those games. You know what I mean? We're not even at the table in many of those situations, and in some cases in entire communities because of that. So I think it's a really critical point. I know Assistant Secretary Meister probably has a lot more to add on implementation, but I just think your funding question is a key one that we should focus on in the future, which, yes, is going to require more funding. But again, I think it's a worthy conversation because I think we can make a huge difference in many of those small, particularly rural communities.
Right, and I understand your point with these organizations, if they either, with the certification process tied to the possibility of that recurring funding, that's could be a win-win.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. As I said, our goal is to screen in, not screen out. So one of the things that our report outlines is a phased timeline, as we mentioned. So the first being that shelters have at least 12 months from the date regulations are adopted to come into compliance and to apply for certification. Beyond that, we also recommend a staggered cohort for applications. So we obviously can't and don't want to process 200 applications in the same month, right? That's really not reasonable. It doesn't allow us a quick response timeline. So in the report, we outlined that the 200 existing shelters would be staggered across a 2-year period. So really, to get to 100% certification of all shelters, we're talking 3 to 4 years. This is a long window of time for folks to prepare for compliance. And then in addition, we also are focusing the regulations in this phase around the necessities. So we're not proposing things like minimum staffing requirements. We're not proposing things like you must provide transportation or you must provide 3 meals a day, which all have a financial cost to them. We're talking about things like you can't tell a family with a teenage boy that they can't come in and be together in a shelter. We're establishing rules like you need to have adequate working bathrooms, really basic like living conditions and accessibility standards. Maybe down the line, 5 years from now, we'll want to revisit some of these things. But for now, we're really focused on how do we make them safe and accessible, not necessarily make it so that shelters can't operate or require huge investment to come into compliance. And then along with that is the technical assistance. So much of the certification process, we're proposing that DHCD would provide the templates for.
I wanted that on the record.
Yes,
So the
and
technical
I put it in writing on
assistance,
purpose.
the technical assistance for the small, especially the smaller
Yes.
nonprofits will be provided by.
We'll have a year of training to get onboarded. We'll provide sample forms, templates. If we require you to give us a policy, we'll give you a sample policy to amend and provide back to us.
Thank you.
We really want to make this easy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary, for being here and addressing this critical issue. We actually have had a complaint recently, so this would help that. I'm curious about the fiscal note, and it says it's unclear if the bill applies to houses of worship and nonprofit organizations that provide short-term seasonal shelters in their facilities. If these entities are required to meet certification requirements, they may opt not to provide homeless shelter services, which could reduce the supply of shelter space. Do you have any thoughts on that?
As written, the bill does apply to any organization, whether it's a house of faith, worship, a nonprofit, a local government, they're all held to the same standards. We do, in our report, differentiate between a year-round shelter, which typically has a lot more capacity, a seasonal shelter, which usually is kind of opening overnight for maybe a 2 to 3 month period, and then those like true emergency options like motels, overflow shelters, you're opening a bed here or there to fill a gap. The standards are customized to each of those types of shelters, but they would apply equally as well to churches.
Okay. It might need to be clarified, I guess. And just where would we find the report?
I think we have delivered it to the General Assembly. I don't know how that was delivered. I think either through council or.
Okay, we think it might be in your submitted testimony, so
Okay.
we'll figure it out. You may have it.
It was? Okay. So
Part of your
I think it is.
submitted
and
testimony. Okay.
We can also ensure that it gets to all the members of the committee.
Okay, maybe that'd be
directly.
simple. Maybe you can just shoot to my office and email and we can distribute it.
We'll do that.
We'll go Senator Brooks and then we'll go to Senator Augustine and then maybe we'll move to the next bill. Go on.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Secretary, for your all of you for your comments. I was trying to look at it from the pros and cons, and the pros would be the standardization of service, the protection of the residents' rights, and then the improved data management. But at the same time, there are some cons here, and one would be the increased operational cost. Number two would be there's the administrative burden on some small, exempt organization. And the third one would be the potential for a reduction in the number of shelters that are available. I do have one in my district, and they provide shelter up to about a month for a whole family, you know. But they were concerned about the cost. Now, these, I saw there were 2 letters one from a 501c3 and unfavorable, and another one from the Baltimore Rescue Mission, who also were unfavorable, have submitted a letter of unfavorable for this. How would you just address those particular concerns?
Yeah, let me start off by saying, and you know, feel free to weigh in. But I'd start off by saying, as with any policy change, yes, there are trade-offs, right? I think the first 2 categories, actually it applies to all 3. All 3 of the potentially cons that you mentioned are things that we would seek to minimize through how we implement. You know, could there be additional administrative burdens that lead to that first category, potential operating cost increases? Yes, but as Assistant Secretary Meister pointed out, you know, it would be our objective to make that as easy as possible through the provision of templates for policies, through hand-holding and technical assistance through the process, through advising and answering questions from staff standpoint, and even including site visits. That first category, increased operating costs, the things that are not necessarily directly connected to an administrative burden, but might be an operating cost increase, whether that had to do with plumbing or, you know, you name it, I think all come down to basic life safety and humanity and dignity, like the fundamentals that any shelter, any place providing shelter to a human being should provide. And I would also say that there is a worthy objective, to get back to Senator Carrozza's point, of tying ongoing funding support to, and even one-time funding support to address some of those challenges on the front end. If there's not 2 ADA accessible bathrooms, for example, or an NADA accessible bathroom, is it a worthy investment of state resources to support that change rather than have them shut their doors? Absolutely. And so I think that would take a redesign, a little bit of some of our grant funding opportunities, but that's not a heavy burden for us to figure out. That's exactly the kind of flexibility I think that we want to bring to this conversation. And then to your third point about potentially losing some of those shelter beds, I think we knew going into this conversation that might be either a legitimate or a rhetorical, strategy, right? But I think let's assume that every bed that might legitimately say, either because we don't want to comply or because the burdens that you're placing us are too much, we're going to close our doors. It would be the responsibility of our agency at least, and the administration in general, and collectively state government, to try to overcome that for that community, that jurisdiction, whether that be through supporting, to Senator Watson's point, supporting the expansion or opening of a different shelter, or helping them navigate to a different solution of how they provide shelter support for people experiencing homelessness. I think the bottom line is we've got a lot of runway to figure this out in each unique example. I am sure there are going to be particular points which we don't see eye to eye, but I think most of these things can be sorted out through a partnership approach. From our perspective, we've got to take the partnership approach. That's got to be our obligation and responsibility, and it would be.
Okay.
Can I add to that? Yeah. So I think that fundamentally the issue is, it came up in the testimony, which is we need to take at least the same level of concern and attention for people who are using the shelter system as we do for animals that use a shelter system. And because this is about creating an infrastructure for the future, as well as for serving older people and others now, I think it's well worth the exercise to say we're going to have basic standards, just basic human standards for people who access the shelter system. And then as we move forward, the broader conversation about what should be the expectation for the quality of those services. And most importantly, and I'm happy to hear you talking about partnerships, I think there's an opportunity for state agencies to partner around this, because we know, particularly at the Department on Aging, one of the things I said to Secretary Day very early on is, we don't do housing. We do supportive services. And one of the ways that we can be a good partner around this kind of work, and we currently are working with the department on these kinds of things, is what are the service needs that need to be addressed? And can some things happen before a person ever needs to use the shelter system? And are there ways that we can collaborate around that more effectively? So I think that this, raising the level of awareness around this and the importance around this allows us to begin to think more broadly about how we best serve the citizens of Maryland. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And one quickly, has either the unfavorable reached out to you or vice versa?
Not yet, but
Okay.
But we'll be reaching out to them. So part of our 3-month engagement is reaching out to every single shelter in the state, and they will each have the opportunity to tell us how these recommendations impact their personal shelter.
Okay.
So we'll have an individualized feedback process.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
I would note that we do have additional witnesses on this bill after. So that said, Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm struggling with the two-ness of what you're saying, right? You're saying you guys have delivered a report, but then you're saying you haven't delivered the report, because you're saying you actually haven't talked to the people who are currently doing the work. And you're asking us to create a program without having that input or feedback actually in the report. Is that so?
So we did a lot of engagement between last session and now around what folks would like to see in a shelter certification system, what boundaries and guardrails they would like it to have, how far should it go. We did months of meetings, one-on-one in group settings. That all informed what we're calling the phase 1 report, right? But what we found is that folks like to see the specific regulations that they would be held to. So that's what this report is. It's laying out, here's the specific standards. So rather than the bill, which says we're going to establish habitability, this says your water must be, free of contaminants. This says bathrooms must be accessible, so that they know exactly what we're proposing. And then over this next 3 months, they have the opportunity to see those specific standards and respond to them. Typically, in a licensing or regulation process, these kinds of standards would not be released until the regulatory review period. And so we're trying to work ahead of that process.
Okay, but I understand that, but the bill that passed last year was to inform the process such that we would be able to make a good decision, which should have included, usually when I see a report or something like this, there's documentation about the feedback that was received from the stakeholders and everything else, but there's none of that in what this has here, right?
It'll be in the final version.
Okay, but you're asking us to then create statutory law without that right now. Is that so?
We're laying out the feedback we did receive. So this is based on feedback that we received
Because
through
again, that's
stakeholder
what
engagement.
the opposition is saying. The opposition is saying that you guys didn't talk to them and that they have not. I'm just telling you what it says. So I'm just giving you that feedback.
Yeah.
But then you're asking us to sort of make decisions without those who are right now helping and serving our homeless people today.
Yeah,
And they're doing that hard work.
Yeah, this first phase of engagement is with, I'd say, the major players in the homeless services field. So local governments, continuums of care. I think.
Well, that was also part of it too. Like I see the name there, but I don't see the engagement with the local authorities, the local housing authorities who would have had this responsibility, would know these folks. I just don't see it here. In order to be able to, what you're talking about, it's not in the report.
I think we can provide some additional background information because we did engage with local government. We did engage with our COCs around the state. So I think we could provide additional documentation and feedback from them or get testimony from them about those conversations. I will say I completely understand the desire for all of this to be sorted out, all of those details and conversations to be sorted out before adopting the statute. We're looking at this as a bifurcated process, adopting the statute and then adopting the regulations, which I think is a pretty normal pattern, but I do.
Well, then why do we ask for the study in order for the study to help us with the?
I think the study is enough to inform the statute. I really do. But I do understand.
It seems very incomplete right now. I mean, I'm just saying from what you might expect to see from it. There's still time. We got time, and you've said that. You're in an engagement process and stuff like that. It's just that I would just hope that we would have more from those who would be a part of it. That's just all I'm sharing with you.
And I think, Senator, happy to sit down and understand, what might be more informative to the process so that we can draw that out. Because I agree, we don't want to leave anything on the table or undiscussed. Let's work through all of those details. Happy to work with anybody who currently opposes, anybody who's supportive, and to really bring all those voices together.
Thank you.
Okay, I do not see any additional questions for this panel. Thank you to both our secretaries and our third panelist as well. I'm going to call up a panel of 4 folks who have signed up favorable. We do have some unfavorable testimony as well. I'm going to call Jeremy Browning. Is Mr. Browning here? I've got Charlotte Hoffman. I've got Paul Ellington. And I've got Ebony Battle. Those are 4 witnesses signed up favorable in person. We also have a couple of virtual witnesses and some opposition testimony. So tell us who you are, and we're going to have to put you on the time clock. Secretaries are not as such. So you get, we're going to go 2.5 minutes for each of you to give your testimony, okay? Each. So we'll start with you, sir. Tell us who you are.
So thanks. Good afternoon, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. My name is Jeremy Browning. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the director of the Maryland Commission on LGBTQIA+ affairs. On behalf of the commission, we strongly support Senate Bill 234 to establish a homeless shelter certification program under the Department of Housing and Community Development. This bill represents an essential step toward ensuring the safety, dignity, and rights of all individuals experiencing homelessness in Maryland. This bill includes an anti-discrimination provision that is critical to ensuring that marginalized community members, including LGBTQI+ individuals, are treated with dignity and respect while accessing temporary shelter. This bill will also, I think, has the potential to increase the availability for some of our most vulnerable community members. So I know there's some concern about losing availability, but just I want to emphasize that this increases, I think, availability for folks that really need it. And I want to point out some data that underscores this. The 2022 U.S. Trans Survey Early Insights Report found that more than 1/3, or 34% of transgender respondents were experiencing poverty, and nearly 1/3 had experienced homelessness in their lifetime. The Williams Institute report, LGBT People and Housing Affordability, Discrimination, and Homelessness, highlights that LGBTQI+ people have higher rates of poverty, lower rates of home ownership, and higher rates of homelessness compared to non-LGBTQI+ people. And finally, the True Colors United's report, At the Intersections, reveals that LGBTQ+ youth and young adults are 120% more likely to experience homelessness than their non-LGBTQ+ peers. And service providers estimate that 20 to 40% of youth experiencing homelessness identify as LGBTQ+. So for those reasons, the commission strongly urges a favorable report on Senate Bill 234.
Okay, thank you. Let's go through all 3 witnesses, then we'll take questions. And again, tell us who you are, and you're on the 2.5 minute clock, okay?
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair. I am Charlotte Persephone Hoffman. I am the Policy Director with Trans Maryland. Trans Maryland is a statewide, multiracial, multi-gender community power building organization that acts on behalf of Maryland's transgender community. Pardon me. I want to emphasize how desperately needed protections for or the non-discrimination provision of this bill is necessary for Maryland's transgender community. Currently, across the state, there are almost no facilities that provide affirming housing for transgender Marylanders. Those few that do exist are in Baltimore City and tend to be at or above maximum capacity at pretty much all times. And this is a particularly crucial issue for transgender Marylanders because we are about 4 times as likely as the public as a whole to experience housing instability and homelessness. According to the 2022 U.S. Trans Survey, which Jeremy mentioned just a moment ago, about 30% of respondents, and this was 92,000 respondents across the United States, 30% reported having experienced homelessness thus far in their lifetimes. That's more than double the national average of 14% of people who've experienced some form of housing insecurity, and quadruple the number, which is about 7.4% of those who have reported experienced literal homelessness. The reasons for this are varied. A lot of it has to do with the fact that there is so much discrimination against trans people in housing and employment as a base level. So, for instance, 1 in 5 transgender people have reported being denied an apartment or a home because of their gender expression. 1 in 10 have reported being evicted because they were trans. In addition, there is huge problems with trans people having unsupportive families, and because families so often act as like the housing option of last resort for people. If your parents were abusive towards you, they're not a place that you can go when you find yourself without somewhere else to go. So for these reasons, we encourage a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to, that's the buzzer. It's a new buzzer. Okay, you next tell us your name. And Mr. Ellington, you can come up. This is part of the panel. We're on Senate Bill 234. You signed up straight favorable, but you're going to go first and tell us your name.
Good afternoon, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. My name is Ebony Battle. I'm a resident of Baltimore County. I'm here representing Housing Our Neighbors. We are people with lived experience of homelessness, allies and advocates fighting for the right to housing in Baltimore City. Our organization represents dozens of people who live or have lived in homeless shelters across Baltimore City and Baltimore County. I want to thank the chair and committee members for their time, as well as the Department of Housing and Community Development for their advocacy on this issue. This matter is critical because this issue is about our most vulnerable members of society. I'm going to share my experience as a caseworker at a community resource center in Baltimore City to illustrate why SB 234 is so important. Most of the guests that we serviced were unhoused. There are things that I will never forget about that experience. For instance, I recall caseworkers grieving with our clients when we heard the news of someone passing away due to hypothermia or random acts of violence. We often did outreach and would find our clients stiff and unresponsive in extreme weather conditions. There was one woman that all the staff were well acquainted with. She struggled with various health issues, putting her at further risk for harm. She had a formal diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Furthermore, she was always happy and would speak to all the staff. If we didn't see her for a few days, we would all get worried about her well-being. One day, I found her unrecognizable in a tent behind a shopping center. We pleaded with her to go to a shelter, but she refused. She had various dehumanizing encounters with city shelters and did not want to go back to one. While this story is only the story of one of my clients, Housing Our Neighbors does outreach every week to various shelters and hears story after story of dehumanizing treatment and poor conditions. If this bill passes, the quality of life in shelters will improve for residents. Moreover, the staff will receive training that will hopefully teach them how to interact with vulnerable communities during crisis scenarios. Housing is dignity, healthcare, and a human right. Thank you for your time today, and I respectfully urge a favorable report on SB 234.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ellington.
Thank you for your leniency. I'm here on behalf of the City of Cambridge, Crisfield, and Worcester County, and we'd like to thank the Secretary and his agency for their works on rural homelessness, because we have needs that tend to be a little bit different, but we fully support this because we have a growing homeless situation that is, frankly, a little bit out of control. We rely a lot on our overperforming nonprofits, and we would just simply request, in the interest of time, I'll keep it brief, we request a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions for any of the panelists? Vice Chair Kagan.
Sorry, just, this probably would have been for DHCD, but I missed it until now. I'm seeing MACO's proposed amendments, Maryland Association of Counties. I just want to flag that. I'm not going to put you on the spot there, but perhaps you'll want to take a look and let the committee know whether you are amenable to consider those, because I don't know that they're here to testify. Thank you.
Okay, you may not have those, so you don't have to, you can take a look at them later. Senator Washington.
Thank you. And I appreciate each testimony, and you've raised general issues of concern and the lack of housing. But in particular, this piece of legislation is focused on probably initially sort of the physical and basic needs. And I think perhaps you may have experienced, or could you let the committee know, have you observed or received clients who have been living in shelters that lacked housing, lacked heat, lacked, the sort of the very basics? Have you gotten this information from any of your clients?
Yes, so like I said, Housing Our Neighbors, we do outreach in Baltimore City every Saturday, and we interact with unhoused population, and we have pictures and testimony from various people who lived in shelters. And the conditions are really poor. The bathroom facilities are just inhumane, and on top of that, like air conditioning, heating isn't adequate.
And have any of you heard of stories where large organizations or a particular house has set itself up as a shelter and has required funding or the transfer of benefits or any of that sort of thing in an unregulated context? Have you heard of any of that? And if you haven't, it's fine. It's just that that's part of what we're trying to do.
I haven't heard of that precisely. I can say that we at Trans Maryland, and me personally in other positions I've been in previously, and it's great to see so many in this committee again. I have heard many stories of queer people across the gender spectrum that have gone to various homeless facilities across the state and been told, basically, we don't want you here. And so as much as this bill is about ensuring that there are, functional bathrooms, functional heating, et cetera, it's also about ensuring that people are not turned away at the door just because of who they are.
Right, individuals receiving state funding, et cetera. But again, I just didn't want to lose because this,
and we
this
definitely
panel is testifying to the civil rights aspect of it, which the majority of the bill is about the conditions.
Yeah, we also have heard extensive things about different facilities. I unfortunately don't have all that information in front of me at the moment. And also I will throw out that I joined Trans Maryland as policy director about 2 months ago. Right. So I'm getting on board with everything myself right now, but I know that we do have a lot of communications that we've had with people about all of the issues they've had. And these things, we've heard everything that's mentioned today as issues that people have had.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I don't see any additional questions for this panel, so I want to thank you. Before we go to the favorable with amendment testimony and then one unfavorable, we do have 2 virtual witnesses. Do you want to, let's, that are signed up straight favorable. You all are free to leave, and thank you for your testimony. We've got Christy Richardson. Is she in the queue? Or, okay, and then we have a second witness, Nicole Hollywood. But let's go with Ms. Richardson. We see you there. You've signed up straight favorable, and you've got 2.5 minutes, okay? So why don't you proceed?
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting me speak today. My name is Christy. I'm the Community Support Manager for Wycomico Public Libraries in Salisbury, and I work daily with individuals who experience homelessness. I also serve on the board of directors for a local emergency shelter. I wanted to testify in strong support of Senate Bill 234, which would establish the homeless shelter certification program with the Department of Housing and Community Development. In my professional experience, I've witnessed significant disparities on how shelters operate, often due to the lack of clear standards and accountability. Without standardized practices, shelters in my area frequently turn away individuals for discriminatory reasons, including sexual orientation, language barriers, criminal history, disabilities, and mental health or substance use disorders. These practices perpetuate homelessness and deny vulnerable individuals safe refuge that they desperately need. I'm going to list personal accounts of these examples that I have witnessed. A transgender woman was forced to sleep on the men's side of the shelter where she was sexually harassed until she chose to return to the street. A separate trans individual was turned away, and the director of the shelter cited that she was a danger to children despite having no criminal record. A man was denied shelter because he spoke Haitian Creole and was deemed a liability. A family was turned away because the parents were unmarried. The director of the shelter encouraged them to go to the courthouse and get married, or he would not accept them in their shelter. A man with no mobility challenges was denied access to shelter and left to sleep on the streets with his walker. A man with substance abuse disorder was turned away on the coldest night on record, and he died of hypothermia that night. 4 men that I work with criminal records cannot be admitted into shelters because of their charges, so they are forced to sleep outside in a tent. Senate Bill 234 would establish clear and enforceable standards that address these inequalities by promoting consistency and quality, protecting resident rights, and enhancing data-driven solutions like mandating participation in HMIS, which would identify service gaps and improve outcomes. This bill represents a critical step toward ensuring shelters are places of safety, dignity, and equity for everyone. I urge you to support Senate Bill 234 and help pave the way for a more compassionate system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the witness, Ms. Richardson? Okay, seeing none, we'll go next to Nicole Hollywood. Again, you've got 2.5 minutes. You've signed up straight favorable.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Dr. Nicole Hollywood. I'm a professor in the University System of Maryland, a member of the Maryland Commission for LGBTQIA+ Affairs, and a board member of PFLAG Salisbury. I'm testifying today on behalf of PFLAG Salisbury. Well, LGBTQI+ youth make up only 77% of the total U.S. youth population. They comprise an astounding 40% of all youth people experiencing homelessness. LGBTQI+ youth usually face homelessness after fleeing abuse and a lack of acceptance at home because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Once homeless and with few resources at hand, LGBTQI+ youth are pushed towards criminalized behaviors such as drug sales, theft, or survival sex, which increase their risk of arrest and detainment. Simply put, LGBTQIA+ youth are at a higher risk of both homelessness and incarceration and the many deleterious harms accompanying these situations. PFLAG Salisbury operates on the Eastern Shore, where there's a severe shortage of homeless shelters and no LGBTQIA+ dedicated or affirming shelters. We strongly support this bill and recommend a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for the witness? Okay, thank you. Thank you to you both. We're now going to go to, we do have one witness in person signed up favorable with amendments. Daniel Stolfus is, Daniel, if you come up, you've got favorable again with an amendment or amendments, and you'll be under the 2.5-minute clock.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. Appreciate the opportunity. My name is Daniel Stolfus. I serve as the CEO at Helping Up Mission in Baltimore City. And
No problem here. Hey, here, just hold on one second. Okay, I think it was, he had 2 mics on there, or no? Just hold a second.
Okay.
Okay, we did not want to deny the millions of viewers the testimony, sir, so it's all back to you, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Chairman and committee members, for the opportunity to testify. I serve as the CEO at Helping Up Mission in Baltimore City. And on behalf of Helping Up Mission, we support the legislation and the effort to create safe housing for those experiencing homelessness, but we do have some questions and concerns that we hope can be resolved through the amendment process. Helping Up Mission has been serving on the streets of Baltimore City for 140 years, and our mission, which started out to help up those who are leading dissolute, abandoned lives, continues today. And we're grateful for the support from the governor's budget, from state capital sources to enhance and strengthen our facilities over the years. Last year, we served 2,971 men, women, and women with children experiencing homelessness and addiction. Our primary focus is our one-year spiritual recovery program. In fact, it's the large majority of our 500 beds for men and our up to 200 beds for women and women with children. We have 50 beds that we operate for men and 28 beds for women that we would consider to be overnight shelter, which we assume those would be the ones relevant to this certification process. We voluntarily sought CARF accreditation. We're committed to standards and continuous growth. We're also committed to protect our neighbors from suffering from homelessness. We've been on the front lines of that issue, again, through our history. And we serve residents in our programs at Helping Up Mission of literally every county in the state of Maryland. And so we meet people exactly where they are at their point of need. We even operate mobile outreach around Baltimore City to remove barriers to recovery and to shelter. So the bill, as we understand it, was based on a report that was mandated by HB 577 and SB 1107. It outlines 6 to 7 types of shelters that a place like Helping Up Mission actually doesn't neatly fit in any of those categories. And so our primary concern and request for amendments and consideration is because this is being pushed, as Senator Augustine noted, to a statutory regulation without a lot of input from the folks that are providing these services. In fact, we reached out in July of 2024 to try to offer support.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any questions for the witness? Favorable with amendment, witness. Okay, seeing none, thank you. Thank you very much. Which brings us to our final witness on this bill. We've got a witness, George Jones. Is Mr. Jones here? He signed up unfavorable. Mr. Jones, if you could come up to the witness table. And you will have 2.5 minutes, okay? Unfavorable.
I'd like to say thank you to the ladies and gentlemen of this committee for allowing me to be here to speak. I'm George Jones. I'm the executive director of the Baltimore Rescue Mission. We've been in operations for 69 years now to meet the needs of homeless men and women in the city of Baltimore. Our mission was started in a time when segregation was taking place in Baltimore City, when there were no missions which would allow African Americans in. We were started for that purpose. But I want to bring quick attention to the fact that I am unfavorable on this position because the Baltimore Rescue Mission is a ministry. And that ministry meaning is based upon and operated under inextricably tied to our religious and biblical principles in its operation, employment decisions, intake rules, and requirements for its participants. As a matter of religious principles, we take no funding from government in any form, neither from federal, state, or local, and nor will we if it is offered. Our program participants are required to participate in religious activities. The Baltimore Rescue Mission is in compliance with fire, health, and safety requirements. The city does come in, the health department. We meet their needs, the fire department standards already. We've already got standards that we have to meet. And the Baltimore Rescue Mission is more than just a homeless shelter. It is a religious ministry to the needy. We are a church organization. We have a gospel service every single night of the week. We don't force anyone to come into our doors. They agree to come in. They are given a copy of the rules, and they agree whether or not they want to come in and abide by them. But this legislation proposed is so broad that there is no religious exemption, which violates our First Amendment rights.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Any question for the witness? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 234. Mr. Secretary, before we go to the next bill, Senate Bill 235, I'm going to call Senator Simon up here for a one witness, 1 minute local bill. He needs to go to another hearing room, and I want to get him to push this local Anne Arundel City of Annapolis bill out in 1 minute or thereabouts. Okay, Senator Simon Ayer, we're on Senate Bill 50. Senate Bill 50.
Thank you. You can start the clock. So for the record, I'm Senator Brian Simon Ayer, Senate Bill 50. It's a local Anne Arundel County bill that just updates the name of the tourism entity that we have. We will provide the letter of recommendation after our Senate delegation meeting, and with that, I ask for a favorable consideration.
Okay, any question for Senator Simon Ayer? Seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 50. And now we're going to go back to you, Secretary Day, on Senate Bill 235.
Right. Okay, Chair Feldman, thank you again. Vice Chair Kagan, committee members. I don't know if I need to put my name in the record one more time, but
you do, because, you know, again, I mentioned the millions of folks watching, and they may have just tuned in, so yes.
Understood.
And tell us who's with you as well.
Well, for those I haven't met before, my name's Jake Day. I'm the Secretary of Housing and Community Development for the state of Maryland, and I have with me Carrie Snyder, who is DHCD's Director of Community and Economic Development Partnerships. And we're here to talk to you about Senate Bill 235. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for sponsoring the legislation on behalf of the department. You have our written testimony, I believe, but I want to summarize and provide a few key points to our intent before I hand it over to Carrie. So Senate Bill 235 formally codifies something that the department has been doing for the last couple of years. This is Project Restore. It's an initiative, as an ongoing, it would codify it as an ongoing state program, but it's an initiative that has been managed by the Department of Housing and Community Development. Project Restore provides incentives to new or growing small businesses to reactivate vacant spaces and vacant properties. It's been an incredibly effective program, but has relied only on federal funding for the revitalization of main streets and business districts in communities in every corner of Maryland, rural, suburban, and urban. It's been an extremely attractive program to Maryland business owners and entrepreneurs, with demand for program funds far exceeding the supply available over the life of the program. And part of this is because Project Restore helps turn the visions and aspirations of those small businesses or folks who want to start a small business into a brick and mortar reality. For local governments and for community stakeholders, it's helped turn strategically important vacant properties that they identify into, from embarrassing eyesores into active, functioning, revenue-generating, tax-paying businesses. Project Restore creates jobs, stabilizes communities, and promotes economic growth. And as Governor Moore has said, the only way to fix Maryland's fiscal crisis is to grow our way out of it, and I agree wholeheartedly. One of the greatest lessons that I learned as a mayor down in Salisbury was that your community is one of two things. It's either growing or dying. And with that lesson, I took that lesson, and it was further reinforced as I witnessed communities all over the state of Maryland who aspired to be growing and help create opportunities for the small businesses in their communities. Maryland, once again, has, and we've talked about this probably ad nauseum, but Maryland has a stagnant economy. We have not been growing. The last decade has experienced very slow growth as a state. And I believe that this is a program that can fundamentally overcome that. I also believe wholeheartedly that great places win. So filling vacant spaces is a part of contributing to great main streets, great shopping districts, great revitalized core communities. It attracts jobs and addresses the fundamental challenges that communities have. So in Project Restore, we have a proven tool. This is a tool that is specifically designed, again, to reduce vacant spaces in downtown and commercial corridors, provides low barrier access to capital, particularly for women and minority-owned businesses, and specifically assists micro and early stage businesses at eliminating the requirement for matching funds, which is a financial barrier to many of the other tools that we might have available. We also provide wraparound support services and guidance, technical assistance from our expert staff to help facilitate partnerships with local and place-based economic development organizations, the type of organizations that usually administer these funds. These economic development partners like Main Street organizations, downtown business or central business district organizations, they further support Project Restore businesses with marketing and branding and other technical assistance skill sets. Project Restore is both a place-based economic development tool and a vehicle for wealth building for our entrepreneurs. So in addition to growing small businesses and contributing to job creation, this program enhances the character and appeal of the very places that are going to help Maryland's economy grow. Makes our communities, our downtowns, the places that will help restart Maryland's economic engine. So I understand that there is not funding in the budget as proposed, but we think it's important to cement this in state law so that this program can be funded in the future. That is, I think, a good step in the right direction for us to identify and articulate this as a budget priority in future years. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Carrie Snyder.
Ms. Snyder?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Excuse me. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Project Restore.
You could bring that mic a little closer.
Sure. Okay. I'll start over. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Project Restore. Launched by the department in FY22 with American Rescue Plan Act funds, Project Restore is specifically designed to incentivize small business investment in vacant storefronts in downtown and neighborhood business districts. The program has helped nearly 800 small businesses and created more than 1,400 jobs. In the first 2 rounds of Project Restore, more than 60% of funding recipients were minority and women-owned businesses, illustrating the special nature of Project Restore as both a place-based economic development tool and a vehicle for entrepreneurial wealth building. In every program year, the department has received more requests for funding than funding available. In total, the program received $176 million in requests for $50 million in available funds. Project Restore provides funding to place-based economic development organizations that then subgrant those funds to small businesses, providing low barrier access to capital to attract and support new or growing businesses. By providing funding to place-based organizations, we align Project Restore investment with local placemaking and economic development goals and ensure ongoing local technical assistance that makes it more likely for a small business to succeed. Eligible uses of funding include rent, interior and exterior renovation, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and building acquisition. Providing support for acquisition allows the business owner to purchase the commercial building where their business is located, helping to build wealth and prevent displacement. Examples of businesses supported include Sweet Home Jamaica, a woman-owned restaurant in South Baltimore City that opened on a block with mostly vacant commercial storefronts. Their success has enticed other businesses to fill those nearby vacant commercial spaces. Another Project Restore recipient, Runner's Wings, a veteran-owned fitness and running store in historic downtown Frostburg, is already giving back to the community by sponsoring local sports teams and events. They were nominated for the Best of the Blue Ridge Awards for running shops in their first year of business. Project Restore is a proven and effective tool for growing small businesses and creating jobs and enhancing the character and appeal of Maryland's vital downtowns and main streets. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Secretary Day or Ms. Snyder with Vice Chair Kagan?
Thank you. Just a quick question for the Secretary, for either of you. Page 3, lines 7 through 11. to do this to help the small businesses within the jurisdictions they serve. I wonder if you'd be amenable to the concept of support the small businesses and nonprofit organizations. There was an example in Rockville Town Center where an arts organization, Viz Arts, opened in an empty space in Rockville Town Square that was for arts for people with disabilities. It brought people to Town Square. It meant that they went out for lunch or dinner and bought gifts and all the things while they were there. So just tossing that out is just one example that I happen to know.
Sure, yeah, we can clarify that in the language, but the program as it's currently designed and how it's laid out in the bill does allow for nonprofits as applicants and recipients of funding. They're considered small businesses in the same way. But we can make that much clearer.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, additional questions? Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's great that this program has done well. Did it do well with federal funds?
It did.
Basically, right? And so now we're out of federal funds?
That's right.
Basically. So the only thing, y'all, I mean, this is great, right? And I know what you said about codifying and not, but the fiscal note put 10 million on the fiscal note. So I just would just like let you know that, I mean, you know, we're in a challenging time, like right now. We gotta have priorities and everything. But help me to understand why the fiscal note says 10 million, but it's not, obviously it's not putting it into the statute. Can you help me?
Senator, I'm not 100% sure, but it would only be an effective $10 million is the amount available that we've had for a round. So if we were to follow that same pattern, we would ask for $10 million. I mean, I'd love to ask for $50 million, but I think we could have that level of demand and meet it in a given. I mean, I would even say that the level of applications also reflects the fact that people know the resource is limited. So I think even the $162 million figure that Carrie mentioned is not even reflective of real demand. Because when we talk to those downtown organizations, those Main Street organizations, they know that they are right-sizing their ask for how many dollars we have available. So I think real demand far exceeds even that figure. So 10 million is not inaccurate in that it reflects what we've made available in the past per round, but there would be no fiscal impact if we didn't fund it. If that's, I don't want to contradict DLS.
No, it's not. Yeah, I'm just suggesting maybe it makes sense to go back and try to figure that out a little bit. You know, just because, I mean, we have this is what's in front of us. That's just what I'm saying. Like the 10 million is what's in front of us in a very challenging year. And what I would ask on that too is, as this program has been successful, have people been able to kind of leverage these dollars and have it gone into more significant sort of return on the investment here? Because like we're going to have to be thinking about these things as far as, you know, return on investment of what we're doing.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can probably do is because we have a cohort, it's 800 businesses, but we have a cohort of 800 businesses, we could periodically survey and try to understand what the second and third order economic impacts
that's what I'm
have
saying.
been.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
there's value in that.
Yeah, I'm just putting, oftentimes the fiscal note doesn't give a quantifiable value to us. And so if you all can help us, it helps to better know the real sort of larger impact of what these dollars are doing. And from a dollar standpoint.
Senator, I think at the very least that would elicit or draw out some pretty good anecdotes. I think it would tell a lot of the story too, depending on how we could get information out of that cohort. But at the very least, it would draw out some really good anecdotes that would tell kind of what some of the good stories are. But I would love to have, I think it's worth exploring. I think it's something we can do.
Thank you.
Senator Hester, did you have a question? Or, I'm sorry, you're good. Okay, any additional questions for this panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Secretary. We do have one additional witness, Mr. Ellington. You signed up straight favorable again. If you want to just come up, and you're going to be on the clock. 2.5 minutes. Signed up favorable.
I won't take long at all. My name's Paul Ellington with State and Local Advisors. I'm here on behalf of Crisfield, Cambridge, and Worcester County. This bill, the governor likes to say no one would behind. In our case, this would be no town left behind, because when the small towns of the Eastern Shore, Project Restore has been critical in helping us to reestablish Main Street. Anybody that's been to Cambridge can see that. Small towns like Pocomoke and Worcester County. But I would, Senator Augustine, point out to Mount Rainier's Arts District. You know, back in the day, that was just vacant, used cars, pawn shops and things like that. And now it's vibrant. People live there. And that's where we are now in many of these towns on the Eastern Shore. So all we're asking is, we understand the budget restrictions, but please look favorably upon this, because our vitality, our future depends upon it on the Eastern Shore, and we would ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, questions for Mr. Ellington? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Paul. That concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 235, which brings us next, Mr. Secretary, to Senate Bill 238. Okay, we've got Nicola Tran is also signed up from your shop. Okay, there you go, and it's all yours.
Excellent. Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members, my name is Jake Day. I'm the Secretary of Housing and Community Development. To my left is Nicola Tran, who's DHCD's Director of Housing and Building Energy Programs. I'd like to once again thank the chair for sponsoring this legislation. You've got our written testimony. Senate Bill 238 is a simple technical bill that changes regulations for the Maryland Housing Rehabilitation Program. This is a DHCD program. It's, in fact, our primary program to assist low and moderate income homeowners with repairs to keep their homes healthy, safe, and livable. Program funds can be used for a variety of things, including structural repairs like roofs and foundations, code-related upgrades, accessibility modifications, things to assist seniors and individuals with disabilities. Currently, program funds can only be awarded to local governments. The local government can then subsequently award those funds to local homeowners, either directly or through a community partner. This bill would expand eligible recipients to funding to include certified nonprofit organizations, great organizations that have the desire and capacity to do this work. In many cases, they're already engaged in this type of work. No one, as you can imagine, is a bigger proponent of local government than myself, but frankly, many localities don't have the capacity to administer these funds directly, and this is a burden that is placed on their shoulders to do the constituent engagement work on behalf of the state. So many don't have that capacity to effectively engage with either the local nonprofits, to act as a pass-through, to have to manage the administrative burdens that we currently place on them. As a former mayor, it pains me to say it, but current local government requirements create a constrictive layer, unfortunately, on the dollars that are ultimately trying to reach the homeowner. By allowing nonprofit organizations to be a partner in this process and become direct recipients of the rehabilitation funding, we're going to achieve several things to increase the program's reach and impact. First, those communities that did not have the capacity to participate in the program through their government will now see the benefits of their residents, benefits to their residents by a nonprofit participation. Second, a larger network of participating nonprofit partners allows DHCD to more quickly, efficiently, effectively disperse funds to homeowners. And finally, the same partners who receive funding from DHCD's energy efficiency programs, where nonprofits are eligible, will now become eligible to receive the MHRP repair funds, promoting a streamlined whole home approach to home rehabilitation. So simply put, this program expansion will allow DHCD to serve more people more effectively and in a more energy efficient and sustainable manner. So for those reasons, I ask the committee for a favorable report on Senate Bill 238. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicola.
Okay.
Thank you.
And you're not on the clock. All-powerful secretary. Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, committee, and thanks for letting me testify here today. This bill is very straightforward and I'm sorry. My name is Nicola Tran. I'm Director of the Housing and Building Energy Programs at DHCD. As Secretary Day mentioned, this bill is a technicality to allow sub-granting of the program funds to nonprofits instead of just local governments. This will increase the efficiency and the streamlining of flowing the program funds to homeowners that need them for critical repairs, such as upgrades to their roofing, structural issues, mold, asbestos remediation, and other critical repairs that allows them to stay in their homes. I do want to point out that we are currently working on an integration between our energy efficiency and repair programs for a more streamlined approach to bring all repairs a low-income homeowner may need through one approach. And a lot of these nonprofits that perform housing rehabilitation are already in the homes of low-income households making energy efficiency upgrades. Under the current structure, they would then have to refer those customers if they also need critical general repairs, refer them back to us, or refer them back to a local government. So this approach will flow those funds directly to those nonprofits so they can issue them on the spot as they identify repairs. And therefore, I'm respectfully requesting a favorable report on SB 238. And
Okay.
we're available for any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the secretary or our additional witness? Okay, seeing none, thank you. We also have Paul Ellington. You want to come back up here? You're signed up favorable. You are on the clock of 2.5 minutes. And then we're going to go, we have one virtual witness, Ruth Ann Norton. We'll take you next. Ruth Ann, Paul Ellington, 2.5 minutes, signed up favorable.
Paul Ellington, State Local Advisors. I'm here on behalf of the Greater Crisfield Action Committee, Crisfield and Cambridge. As the Secretary stated, this is something that, frankly, small towns don't have the capacity to handle. And we have nonprofits in place that can help streamline the process and get the money in the most efficient, expedited manner to the homeowners. And as we talked about, mold is a big problem for us in Cambridge and Crisfield with a lot of the flooding, and a lot of our people wait unnecessarily, often through the bad seasons when mold really thrives and flourishes because it gets bogged down in the bureaucracy through no fault of the towns. They just don't have the capacity to handle it. So with that being said, I would simply ask for a favorable report.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Ellington? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Brings us to our final witness for this bill, Ruth Ann Norton. You've signed up favorable. Ms. Norton, you've got 2.5 minutes.
I am indeed, and thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Secretary and to Nicola for the presentation of this bill. I am the President and CEO of the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative in full support of House Bill, or Senate Bill 238. Senate Bill 238. We are really advancing work on a whole house government efficiency framework throughout the country and here in Baltimore. And as a provider of services, we know from our work here and in 7 cities around the U.S., having the direct pipeline to qualified nonprofits not only saves the government a lot of time and money in the referral process to get the work done, it is better for community residents in the receipt of their ability to get a more holistic approach, better wraparound services, and timely services. As a member of the Green and Healthy Homes Task Force, or Healthy Housing Task Force for DHCD, I think this also advances the work that the legislature set up in that task force. DHCD is doing a wonderful job advancing this work. This only provides greater resources and efficiency to the community, and we're in full support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the witness? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 238, which brings us to the final DHCD bill, Senate Bill 247. Mr. Secretary, come back up here on Senate Bill 247.
Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, committee members, good afternoon. For the record, my name is Jake Day, Secretary of Housing and Community Development for the state of Maryland. To my left is Nicola Tran, Director of DHCD's Housing and Building Energy Programs. And once again, want to thank the chair for sponsoring this legislation. Senate Bill 247 will help Maryland reduce greenhouse gas emissions and help Marylanders reduce their energy costs. It accomplishes this goal by doing two things. First, it expands the multifamily energy efficiency and housing affordability, or MEHA, as it's colloquially called, Greenhouse Gas Reduction Program, to issue loans in addition to grants to support emissions reductions in multifamily communities, particularly those with low-income households. So this is a change that will make the program more available and more attractive to developers. Multifamily housing finance is an incredibly complex, challenging thing, and where you'd think grant money would be preferable to loan money. It actually turns out frequently a loan and the debt associated with the loan and the reliance on that, and it serves both the grantor or the lender, and it serves the developer as well. Specifically because those grant funds can have a negative effect on the value of the investment and tax credits. And all of the affordable housing that we produce in the state is reliant on tax credits. This can disincentivize developers and investors from incorporating MEHA into their projects. The change we are proposing brings MEHA's greenhouse gas reduction program in line with an existing complementary MEHA program that uses Empower funds. That Empower version of MEHA already permits loans, and half of its participants receive the funds in the form of 0% deferred loans instead of grants, which again works for the structure of the financial deal better than a grant would. If we want energy efficiency and emissions reductions in affordable housing, we need to make it easier for our development partners to actually do that work. And Senate Bill 247 does exactly that. The second part of Senate Bill 247 helps reposition DHCD to meet our ambitious greenhouse gas reduction and household energy savings goals. In 2023, the General Assembly passed House Bill 169. That overhauled Empower Maryland and established new goals for energy savings for low-income households. It established the Green and Healthy Housing Task Force, which I'm honored to chair, to develop, I don't know where that name came from, Ruth Ann, but I'm honored to chair it and develop and implement what will ultimately be a comprehensive plan that the state will adopt to achieve those new energy savings goals. It authorized DHCD to use, quote, any and all programs and funding sources consistent with federal law that would contribute to energy savings for low-income households. We did just that, and we drafted a plan approved by the PSC that, among other things, would provide energy retrofits to all low-income Maryland households by 2030. We were set. We had goals, we had a plan to get there, but then last year's session, there were some changes that were made to law, which inadvertently limited the funding sources to only those that are consistent with the Department of Energy, which is the Empower funds, which is, again, a subset of funds. Based on that limitation, DHCD would no longer be able to count half of the funding sources that were included in its approved original plan, such as the ones we're talking about here today. For example, energy savings provided through Maryland Energy Assistance Program, MEAP, the MEHA Greenhouse Gas Reduction Program, or DHCD's rental lending programs would no longer count because they're not governed by DOE. They're not governed by Empower. So any incoming federal funding provided by EPA, the governor's climate down payment, none of that would count toward our goal, and all of it was anticipated in our plan. So those programs and those initiatives, however, I think is critical to point out, would produce energy savings results. They would reduce greenhouse gases. So based on the original provisions of House Bill 169, we were positioned to meet our target. However, we need to be permitted to use all of the funding sources that were included in our plan as, again, originally proposed prior to last year's session. So we're simply asking to go back to that original provision so that we can get to work on implementing our ambitious energy savings plan. So for those reasons, I respectfully ask for a favorable report on Senate Bill 247, and I'll hand it over to Nicola.
Okay. It's all yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, committee. My name is Nicola Tran, Director of Housing and Building Energy Programs for DHCD. As Secretary Day outlined, this bill will focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions via 2 amendments with 2 changes to existing laws. The first change would authorize DHCD to issue loans in addition to grants through the MEHA Greenhouse Gas Reduction Program. The MEHA Greenhouse Gas Reduction Program specifically provides funding for emission reductions in affordable housing properties through electrification and renewable energy projects. Currently, we are running into a barrier that a lot of projects that are interested and into this program and will be required to comply with BEPS standards are discouraged from participating in this program because it is only available as grants. By allowing loans as a funding vehicle, the greenhouse gas reduction program will become more attractive for more types of affordable housing. And I do want to point out that DHCD does not intend to generate or get these loans repaid. Through our other MEHA program that has used loans for about 10 years now, these funds are issued in the form of 0% deferred loans and are only repaid in rare cases in order to keep them affordable for the developers and the projects. The second part of the bill seeks to expand the eligible fund sources for achieving emission reduction targets. As Secretary Day mentioned, we created the plan based on the initial law that passed in 2023. Based on that law, a stakeholder work group was convened to define on how these targets will be achieved. Based on those discussions, a plan was created that was presented to the Public Service Commission as required in the law, and this plan was approved for calendar years 2024 through 2026. It is therefore currently in place. Without the change proposed in this bill, DHCD would no longer be able to count savings produced through funding sources that were part of the initial plan. Based on the limitations, we would lose the savings from funding sources that are either state funded or that come from federal sources that are not DOE. There have been a lot of funding sources issued through the federal government over the past years. Not all of them ran through DOE, so those would not count. However, those funding sources do provide savings to low-income households and meet the requirements of the service that is required through this law. So in order to still meet the savings targets, DHCD is requesting that the language is reverted to the initial law that asks for including all savings that go to low-income housing, as long as those savings are generated in a way consistent with the laws governing those funding sources. And therefore, I respectfully request a favorable report on SB 247.
I just would note before we go to Senator Hester that you kept referencing House Bill 169, 2023. The cross-file was Senate Bill 144, a Feldman bill. I'm just taking credit, so that bill did also pass. Okay, that said, what's that?
Always a good idea.
That said, Senator Hester.
I was just curious if you guys have explored the residential PACE program, because it seems almost identical to what you're doing, with the exception that then the loans would go through the private sector, and therefore eliminate some of the work that DHCD had to do.
Sure. So our low-income programs on the energy efficiency sides are typically provided at no cost to the homeowner or the resident. Because we're working with a very low-income population, any cost connected to a project like this, it typically discourages them from participation. So we are not typically looking at loans that are come at a cost. And the residential PACE program unfortunately does that.
So that makes sense now that you spell it out that way.
Yeah.
We do not have a residential PACE program in the state. So like as we try to achieve our greenhouse gas, I mean, in the commercial sector, it's been highly, highly successful. So I'm just curious if you guys have explored it, beyond this particular program.
Yeah, I'll just share my experience with commercial PACE. program is like you said, Senator, it's incredibly effective. It's been a great tool that's been put to use. I think expansion to residential PACE is something that we should evaluate against the spectrum of other state and federal programs, and we can come back to the committee and offer up a perspective on that. Off the top of my head, I can't see a reason why it wouldn't have additional value. But that's my from the hip reaction. But we can come up with a more detailed assessment.
Okay, additional questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Mr. Ellington, do you want to come back up here? You signed up favorable?
Chair, in case this is the last time that I'm sitting at the table today, I apologize for the faux pas on House Bill 169 versus Senate Bill 144.
It's all good.
Won't happen again.
We're very proud of our legislative achievement. It's hard to get bills out of this place.
As you should be.
Mr. Ellington, 2.5 minutes.
2.5? I'm just kidding. I'm part of the Jake Day fan club. So I'm with state and local advisors, but this time I'm representing Optimize Renewables, a company that's committed to this. And in the interest of your time, we will simply ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Ellington? Seeing none. We do have 2 witnesses virtual. I don't know if they're both on the line. Okay, Justin Berry, you on the queue here, signed up favorable with an amendment on this piece of legislation. Mr. Berry, we're going to, Justin Berry, okay. Can you unmute yourself? Okay, you've got 2.5 minutes and you've signed up favorable with amendments, okay? We can't hear you though. Do you, I think it's on your end. Okay, that's better. We got you. Okay, you can start.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity here to testify. My name is Justin Berry. I'm a senior analyst at the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, national nonprofit organization, as you heard Ruth Ann introduce on the previous bill. I'm testifying on behalf of GHI, offer support with amendments for SB 247, the focus on the second half of the bill relating to DHCD achieving its savings target. We support the holistic approach that this bill brings by allowing DHC to bring together multiple programs in pursuit of its savings goal. As noted in the previous testimony, this approach aligns with GHI's work to implement a line, braid, and coordinate model for housing services. It helps reach low-income households that may have multiple needs and barriers to services that require more than one program. We appreciate and support the plan that DHCD submitted for meeting that savings target and support this bill. The amendment that we'd like to see in the text is keeping the language that's in the current law about the funds that can count towards the goal as being the funds that can be provide and procure by DHCD rather than include a small language tweak that we think is important to help make clear that DHCD is seeking and will continue to seek additional resources to scale their programs in pursuit of this savings goal. So that's the one amendment that we know we'd like to see, which is keeping what's in the current law. So just to conclude, we reaffirm our support for the savings goal. We think that these programs have great benefits for low-income households on health, on climate, on affordability, and appreciate the opportunity to testify.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions for Mr. Berry? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 247. I want to thank the Secretary and his team for doing a great job today. Okay, we're next move. Senator Washington, we've got just 2 more bills. Senator Ellis is here. I didn't see. Well, let's go with Senator Ellis on Senate Bill 35. And you've got a presentation we got to load up here first. So let's give Lamoria a minute to load it up.
Good afternoon, Chair Feldman. By the time you're ready,
Are we,
wait on you.
we're good? Okay, Senator Ellis, we are on Senate Bill 35, and the floor is yours. You take all the time you need.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, members of the illustrious Education, Energy, and Environmental Committee. I'm Senator Arthur Ellis from Maryland District 28, Charles County. I'm also the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on the Management of Public Funds, an interim committee. We have hearings on economic development, management of our towns and counties, and how they manage the public funds. This bill comes out of those hearings we've had since I've been the chair the last 2 years. And I just want to say, last year I brought a bill before this body on clean water up in Western Maryland, and the bill passed and is now law. So we're very active in that committee, bringing problems that we can hope to solve on our local level. Next slide, please. The purpose of the Senate Bill 35 is to impose mandatory educational requirements for people who are working in the finance area, accounting area of our local towns and municipalities. Maryland has 157 towns and cities, 157. The largest is Baltimore City. The smallest is Port Tobacco in Charles County, with a population, last time I checked, 11 citizens. But a total of 157 municipalities, plus 24 counties, including Baltimore City. In addition to those municipalities, there are other taxing authorities, like the bill we passed last year through this committee, dealing with Westport and Western Maryland. So there are 206 of municipalities and agencies that are audited every year by the legislative audit, minus maybe 45, which are audited every 3 years. Now, instead of bringing all those folks in to testify to save time, I have clips, short clips, like 10-second clips, TikTok clips. Oops, I shouldn't say that, but short clips of testimony from committee hearing, which you can see online. And so we could go to the next slide and play some of these. The first, Robert Wells was a senior auditor, office, our legislative audits, our auditor. Go ahead.
It doesn't seem to be cooperating.
Okay, I have a backup.
Okay.
So let's see. Well, they figured out, I'll play this a little loud. Let me see.
In 2023, 206 reports were due from local governments. Our review disclosed that 45 local governments had reports that contained areas of noncompliance with the audit guidelines. These areas of
Okay, so first clip of 206 local governments, 45 non-compliant with guidelines. That's a 22% non-compliance rate. It's not gonna work yet? Okay, good. The second clip.
This unfortunately goes back to well before my time, even as an elected official, that we're finding this decades of problems within our finance department and the turnover of county managers, turnover of all financial officers.
Okay, and that was Lenny Pfeiffer County Council President from Dorchester County. Talking about the turnover and other issues. I have two more short clips. And this clip here, I'm going to play it twice because it's important for you to hear this. This is from Barry Logan, Chief Financial Officer, City of Seat Pleasant.
Services. Part of the problem that the city has suffered with
due to severe staff turnover. The city made a lot of compensating measures to try to bring on consultants, but that became somewhat problematic because some of the consultants they used did not have the proper training, knowledge, and the skills, nor there were processes in place to ensure that routine account reconciliations and bank reconciliations were done.
Okay, so basically she's saying the city, I'm not picking on any one city, I'm a sample of 45 problems. It's one city, they bring in consultants to solve a problem that they couldn't handle. But the people they hired weren't trained, didn't have the experience. And so let me do that quick. Play it again. Just a few, 10 seconds.
Services. Part of the problem that the city has suffered with due to severe staff turnover. The city made a lot of compensating measures to try to bring on consultants, but that became somewhat problematic because some of the consultants they used did not have the proper training, knowledge, and the skills, nor there were processes in place to ensure that routine account reconciliations and bank reconciliations were done.
Okay, and what this person is saying from the seat president, folks come in and can't even balance a checkbook, can't even keep track of the finances for the town. And that's why there are so many years behind in their financial accountability. And the last quick clip.
The city of Hinesville was somewhere between 4 and 5 audits behind. And typically.
Okay, so Hinesville, 4 or 5 audits behind. I've gotten a lot of letters from residents of that city, as my role as Senate Chair, to, hey, do something, you know, this is really terrible. And so the problem is there, and you just heard the testimony, which is available. I think we share the clip with the committee. You can listen to the entire hearings from all the municipalities that came through this year and last year. And that's on our MGA website. And I think we share that with our testimony. Let's see. I think we'll move to the next slide, please. So the purpose of this bill is to strengthen financial integrity of municipal governments by ensuring that individuals in financial oversight positions possess the necessary education and experience. Additionally, the bill seeks to establish ongoing educational requirements to keep these professionals abreast of evolving financial standards and practices. Next slide, please. So the key provisions for Senate Bill 35 are simple. Require basic educational and continuing education and monitoring, which will be done by our legislative auditors. Education provisions, simple. If you are going to work in finance as a controller, treasurer, or other employee dealing with the finances of a town or city, you must have at least 3 semester hours or equivalent of accounting, information systems, accounting ethics, business ethics, auditing. 9 semester hours or their equivalent of financial accounting. And hold a bachelor's degree in accounting, business administration, finance, public administration, or any related field from an accredited institution of higher education. And have at least 5 years of full-time employment experience in accounting or finance or related field that includes at least 3 years in a leadership role in accounting. So these are people running the finances for these towns and these cities, saying, hey, have some basic accounting knowledge. We're not saying to be a CPA, to be any kind of license, but they need the basic classes and experience in order to do accounting for these cities. Is there a problem with the screen?
There's something, but you say there is an obstruction on the screen.
Okay.
But we heard, and we could.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize for that, Vice Chair. So why is this bill needed, Senate Bill 35? Instances of financial mismanagement have been documented in various municipalities. This bill will reduce financial mismanagement. It's important that we do our best so that these towns can stay in business. One of the drawbacks them not doing their due diligence and keeping up with their audits, they can lose their charter. These towns can lose their charter. They can go out of business. And so we have to make sure we do our part to make sure they are there to provide services for their constituents, whether it's water, sewer, snow removal. And so insurance like qualified professional management of finances foster public confidence in local governments also. Many states and private organizations already require rigorous qualification for financial oversight roles. Maryland must follow suit to remain a leader in governance and fiscal responsibility. Do you have a next slide, please? I want to thank you for hearing this presentation, and I'll ask for a favorable report on Senate Bill 35.
Okay, thank you, Senator Ellis. I guess I'll just ask at the front end, if you had any conversations with MML, they have submitted testimony in opposition. I don't know if you've seen it, or if you had any conversations with them.
With various towns and cities, not with the organization proper. A lot of testimony came before the joint committee from the towns and cities.
Well, they're here. They're going to testify next, so I guess you can stick around. Any questions for Senator Ellis? Yes, we've got Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you. Thank you to Senator Ellis for your leadership in this committee the last couple of years. You may not know this about me, but I represent a couple of municipalities. So I think making sure that their finances are in good shape is important. I just wonder whether any other states have laws like this. Did we get this idea or get it recommended from any source?
Well, no, I did not get it from another source. Believe it or not, I'm capable of original ideas.
Oh, 100%.
Just listening, learning as a CPA for like 40 years in Maryland, being an Air Force officer, professional running multi-billion-dollar projects.
Right.
You know, we can do this better. And the people send me here to see something and say something.
Sure.
And I'm saying something. This is a big problem. And some people will say, well, you know, this is a mean bill because it will put people out of jobs. In this bill, we put effective date 2030. So they have 5 years to get basic educational classes if they don't have it. I just want to say that also, this is not every town and every city. Like in every issue, there's a problem area. So this is not a broad base, saying that every town, every city has these problems, but enough have them where we think that this will make a difference.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Okay, additional questions for the sponsor, Senator Ellis? Okay, thank you, Senator. We are going to bring up one witness in unfavorable. We've got from MML, Bill George. Why don't you come up here, Bill? You signed up again unfavorable. You're the only additional witness on this bill. You're going to be on the 2.5-minute clock.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Bill George with the Maryland Municipal League today in opposition to Senate Bill 35 on behalf of all 157 municipalities in the state. A couple things. One, we see this as a heavy-handed, one-size-fits-all approach. As the sponsor described, our membership is quite diverse, and these types of uniform requirements simply don't work for they don't work for every one of our municipalities. Take, for instance, some of our larger municipalities. They offer large populations, many services. We're talking the Rockvilles, the Gaithersburgs, the Ocean Cities, the Cheverleys. These types of requirements may hit home differently there than they do in some of the smaller towns that rely on part-time workers, smaller staffs, sometimes even volunteers, the Willards, the Barnesvilles, the Port Deposits. Secondly, this is a relatively unprecedented instance where the state is inserting itself into municipal personnel matters. I don't know of many, if any, instances where the state imposes certain educational and workforce history pre-qualifications on municipal employees, except law enforcement, which I think we can all kind of agree that's its own separate entity and with its own challenges. Thirdly, as was discussed, the state requires annual audits for all municipal governments. There are a handful of exceptions that can do it every 3 years, as the sponsor stated. These provide us the guardrails. There's guardrails already in place to identify instances of potential financial impropriety. And it's working. It's building public trust. It is offering the transparency that this type of that these type of guardrails are meant to instill in the public trust. So, as part of this, the Department of Legislative Services reached out to MML to provide some input into the fiscal note, which you'll see before you. So I reached out to a wide swath of members of ours, and this is a problem. These requirements would be a problem for not just our smaller members, but some of our larger ones. I'll give you an example. One of our larger members from Prince George's County has an MBA working for them as their treasurer, but doesn't have the requisite number of accounting hours. I find it hard to believe that that person is not qualified to run their town treasury. In opposition, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Mr. George? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 35, which brings us to our final bill of the day, Senator Mary Washington, Senate Bill 42. And Senator Washington, take the time you need when you get to the witness stand, and then we just have one additional witness in unfavorable after that, and then we'll be done for the day. So Senator Washington, again, Senate Bill 42.
Someone with my panel for informational purposes to provide some background. So you can give, yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, Senator Mary Washington. I'm here to present Senate Bill 42, Environment, Interjurisdictional Watersheds, Flood Management. We've been doing a lot today in this area, looking at various management practices and planning. This has to do with the major water resource for the state of Maryland, and that is the Chesapeake Bay. And the Chesapeake Bay watershed spans 6 states. You're going to hear a little bit more about that. But I'm giving you this as a little bit of a context in that we live within a large watershed. I'm a member of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. I'm the chair of our Coastal and Atlantic Bays commissions, and we've all recognized that all the streams and rivers that go into the bay and to the waterways, no matter the political, the jurisdiction, no matter the state, whether it's Pennsylvania, Maryland, or Virginia, that in order to address the problems, we have to work together. And so watersheds are made up of, so there's the bay, but this watershed in the bay itself is made up of streams and tributaries and waterways, all kinds of things that run into it. So Senate Bill 42 simply reaffirms and clarifies the designation of critical watersheds as Carroll Creek, Gwynns Falls, Jones Falls, and the Herring Run, and that those designations will include, or should include, the headwaters and the tributaries as interjurisdictional hazard watersheds under Maryland law. And this designation is found in different parts of the law. I'm just going to read from a couple of letters of you have a number of letters of support, but these quotes capture my intent very clearly. From Blue Water, Baltimore, they say it's time to acknowledge the inherent interconnectedness of our infrastructure system and approach sewer and stormwater management holistically across the entire watershed. This legislation is needed to enhance communication and collaboration about critical infrastructure projects that cross municipalities and jurisdictions for the good of all communities and shared local waterways. The Nature Conservancy goes a little farther and says, reminds us about the connection to climate, that in MDE's recent climate implementation plan, The agency has shared goals for updating stormwater and flood management regulations to account for increases in rain and including climate-sensitive erosion standards. We support and commend MDE's leadership in planning proactively. SB 42 aligns with MDE's stated goals. Now, why does SB 42 matter? If we are really serious about climate change, about reducing flood hazards, we've passed legislation and bills after bills and provided funding, and we want to reduce the costs of flood hazards as well as reduce pollution, then we must focus on protecting the waterways that feed into it, or at least having it considered in our laws and requiring that our departments consider these as regulated water sources, because they are. Just as safeguarding your heart requires that you tend to the capillaries, right, and your veins and all this different things, you know, that you can't have heart health, we can't have bay health, we can't have back river water health, we can't reduce pollution if we're not looking at all of those things that feed into it. So the bay that we must care for, its tributaries and upstream areas are as critical to mitigating all these stormwater issues and flooding. The watersheds named in SB 42 are part of a larger system sustaining the bay. The bay's water quality and ecosystem face increasing risks without proactively managing these waterways and their headwaters. SB 42 reaffirms our commitment to protecting these vital lifelines for reducing pollution, but also our commitment to reducing flood hazards that are the result of climate change and just persistent changing and impacts of development. Now, while this is the broader context in which this bill is operating, this bill does not, as two letters of information from the department state, this bill does not create new designations or impose additional regulatory burdens. The watersheds named in the bill are already recognized in Maryland law and regulation. And in Maryland Environmental Article 5-503 and in COMAR, they've already designated Carroll Creek, Gwynns Falls, Jones Falls, and the Herring Run as interjurisdictional watersheds. A December 2023 letter to Baltimore County Council from MDE when they were inquiring about support and funding and trying to address the Herring Run, headwaters of the Herring Run, she said that, we stated, that regarding the Baltimore County resolution, Maryland Department, MDE, has designated the Herring Run watershed as an interjurisdictional watershed for safety and flood control. This bill, again, they were asking for this support. This bill simply codifies the inclusion of the headwaters as the source of a river. This is clearly defined. If you're going to say water science, it's the source. There's no special definition that's going to be any different than what is in this bill. SB 42 codifies the inclusion of the headwaters, or you can use the word source of a river, and the tributaries, which you could also just use small stream, to ensure comprehensive management of these flood-prone areas. We need consistent state guidance. We passed a bill, SB 227 in 2021, that required MDE to launch the A-Storm initiative. We remember that. And they did that through 2024. And A-Storm conducted surveys and interviews with 56 local jurisdictions to identify the gaps and challenges in stormwater and flood management. This resulted in a comprehensive report that made some recommendations for improving statewide resilience. And the one recommended was that they needed state guidance. The consensus is that the jurisdictions need state leadership. They're asking us to lead on resiliency and stormwater management. Many jurisdictions don't have the staff, they don't feel they have the expertise to make these changes. Additionally, I want to point to the concerns expressed by MDE and MDOT that have been raised about federal funding. SB 42 does not alter, let me repeat, SB 42 does not alter Maryland's existing regulatory framework or introduce new permitting requirements. It's a different reading of the bill. The current designations for these watersheds are already in use, some in code, some here, and some letters. We're just putting them together in this part of the code. So no new meanings or conditions could jeopardize federal reimbursements. If they do, we have time, we could rewrite or come up with a definition. I've asked the agencies to give me the portions of the law that are in conflict, have asked to find out if there's something we can do. But simply deleting a definition doesn't take away the problem that our communities are flooding and there's small streams. Permitting and NEPA reviews, SB 42 does not impose retroactive requirements on the projects with existing permits. As the agency suggests, projects approved under current regulations would remain valid, again, as long as they're approved under current regulations, of course, and the bill simply ensures that the management practices are provided separately. I will stop there and just say, well, I'll end with, flooding costs Marylanders millions of dollars each year in property damage, emergency response, infrastructure repairs, and time again over the years, since the 1936 Watershed Protection Act from the federal government to Maryland being part of the program in 1954, there's been a recognition that jurisdictions need to work together. This bill simply, again, codifies that, makes it simpler, identifies it as a water resource, and it reinforces our commitment to flood resilience. It's a straightforward bill. But before, I definitely want to answer your questions, but before, I'd like the Chesapeake Bay Commission Executive Director to provide some further context and consideration.
Are you Anna?
Yes.
Kilius? Okay, yes, I missed you on the front end. You're signed up just for information purposes only, so we are going to put you on the clock, though, because you're not directly part of the Washington team. So 2.5 minutes, and you can start.
Understood. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Anna Kilius. I am the Executive Director of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. The Commission has not taken a position on SB 42, but I am here at the request of our Commission member, Senator Washington, to offer testimony in an informational capacity. Specifically, I am here to speak to the importance of local and small watersheds as we move to meet the needs of the broader Chesapeake Bay and its goals. As you know, the water quality goals of the Chesapeake Bay are generated by looking at the needs of 92 segments within the bay, within the tidal portions of the bay. We are constantly looking at the progress across all of those segments to determine how we're doing, and all of the small and local watersheds that make up the broader 64,000 square mile watershed that is the Chesapeake watershed. Local watershed protection is essential for the overall health of the bay and bay progress. And as the Chesapeake Bay program at this very moment plans for the future of bay restoration, we are taking seriously the need to look at and prioritize the health of these local watersheds, even as we move towards the health of the broader bay. These local watersheds are particularly important for providing community benefits and as habitat for living resources. Our hope is that by focusing on these local watersheds, we are both delivering local benefits to these communities and we're engaging more people in the work, which is critical right now for us to be successful. So with that, I'll just thank you for your attention to the needs of Maryland's watersheds and your leadership as we all work together to successfully restore the Chesapeake Bay.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Senator Washington or Ms. Kilius? Anna Kilius? Okay, Senator Hester.
I feel like I've been asking for the flood maps to be updated for like 4 or 5 years. And I think it's like, we've also got like a resilience study that's supposed to come out with baseline indicators. Like, does this bill help to fix that? I mean, it's already in code, so like, I don't know if either one of you can tell me why we're not updating the flood maps and what's going.
Yeah,
what's the next
I think
step?
we've been hearing all afternoon that what we put in law might not necessarily be what is being practiced by our agencies. But this bill, honestly, is really about codifying, simplifying, taking something that's in code, some definitions in code, but also recognizing that we don't just think about the bay, or a larger watershed, that stream running behind somebody's house that keeps overflooding, that might be a tributary off, or probably is, off the Herring Run. And that perhaps local jurisdictions could then apply and get support to fix those or repair those, rather than, as they've done in my jurisdiction, Baltimore County, having to purchase 6 homes because it's running over. So again, the bill doesn't do anything that's not already required in law, except to think about, to add Herring Run and put all of these together in in watersheds that have been established as being interjurisdictional, right? And that they are prone to flood.
Okay, any additional questions for either of the two witnesses? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Senator Washington. Thank you, Ms. Killius. Is Mr. Ellington still here in the House, or has he departed? Okay, he's the only additional witness signed up. So that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 42, and that concludes our work for today.